Hey, what's going on, guys? Can you hear me okay?
telling the untold.
Fault lines.
And we're back live, coming to you from across the divided states of America. It is time for another 3 hours of the most disruptive show in American politics, in the politically independent corner. I am investigative political analyst Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
Together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're back. Here's how we do it. Every morning at 7, 8, and 9 a.m. Eastern, we bring you the headlines. After this first batch of headlines, Jamarl comes in and does his monologue, and then the Democratic National Convention took place. Delegates from all 57 states and territories cast ballots to nominate former Vice President Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee for president in 2020. At 10:05 p.m., the votes from the great state of North Carolina clinched the nomination with a total of 2,374 delegates. Biden officially received 83 from the state, with Sanders taking 39. Overall, Biden finished with 3,558 votes, while Sanders ended up with 1,151. Speeches came from his wife and educator, Jill Biden, former presidents Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter, Carolyn Kennedy, former secretaries of state Colin Powell, and John Kerry, again, all speaking out for Joe Biden. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC as she's known, used her speaking slot to nominate Bernie Sanders and to advocate for progressive policies. Tonight, Kamala Harris and Barack Obama will speak. The United States Postmaster General Louis DeJoy will suspend new budget cuts until after the election. He has pledged this. He's also said that the postal system is equipped to handle the election. He's pledged to invoke standby resources in case more help is needed. DeJoy, by the way, is scheduled to speak before Congress within the next week. Senate Intel Committee, by the way, the Senate Intel Committee has released its final report on the 2016 Russiagate Russian collusion story, this narrative that Trump and his associates had worked with the Russians. Again, full disclosure, we work for Sputnik. This is RadioSputnik. So you know that. I'm sure any journalists are very happy to include that little bit of detail anytime they're covering us. But so take that bias in. But looking at this again, to me, this seems like they're putting into stone. They're sort of trying to set as deeply in the record as they can whatever elements of the Russiagate story haven't been just absolutely brutalized by facts over the course of the last couple of years. Specifically, what they're trying to sort of entomb, it seems, is this idea that Paul Manafort did collude, that Paul Manafort, Trump's one-time campaign manager, one of the early figures in this, had actually colluded with the Russians, specifically when he was advocating that Trump look into these accusations that Ukrainians at the embassy in D.C., Ukrainian, ambassadors and officials were working with DNC officials to oppose him and to basically pursue their own bias. So again, foreign interference from another actor. Anyway, it seems like Congress has tried, the Senate specifically, has tried to paint Paul Manafort as a Russian actor, specifically for advocating that Trump look into these accusations, which again became the center of his impeachment scandal, became the center of this stuff, and are true. Anyway, that's one take on this. It also goes into the history of Natalia Veselnitskaya, who the former hosts interviewed, whose clips were played on this show. So we're kind of, as a show, deeply tied into this story. Anyway, like I said, Senate Intel Committee just released this. Kind of a big deal. We'll be talking about that more in the coming weeks, I'm sure. Our next story, stocks have risen to wipe out the virus slump. So COVID, of course, wrecked world markets, although that seems to have hit Main Street more than Wall Street, as stocks have risen, making this the shortest bear market in history. Something does not seem right here. I'll just put it like that. But the S&P 500 rose to an all-time high on Tuesday. That capped off its incredible recovery from the coronavirus-induced sell-off that knocked off its previous record back in February. So again, the stock markets are recovering. We're just living in weird times. We were talking about this yesterday with Marshall Auerbach. Next headline, Australia's Prime Minister says his country should make a coronavirus vaccine, quote, as mandatory as you can possibly make it, end quote. Adding that while there are always exemptions for any vaccine on medical grounds, that should be the only basis. Again, controversial stuff coming from Australia. Australia's Prime Minister pushing for a mandatory vaccine. Forget mandatory masks, but a mandatory injection. There are a lot of people whose hackles this will raise, I'm sure. Next story, the Mortgage Bankers Association says that a record number of home loans backed by the Federal Housing Association, specifically 16% of them, are now delinquent, signaling the effects of the pandemic. Of course, homes get hit hard. That sort of erodes the baseline of stability that you see a lot of Americans having. That is a key sort of bellwether, key canary in the coal mine. Our next story, the president and the prime minister of Mali have resigned and were taken to a military camp near the capital of Bamako following a military coup yesterday. That's a move that's been harshly criticized by international observers. In a televised address, Mali's president, Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, said he wanted no blood spilled to keep him in power. A spokesperson for the soldiers is calling for a, quote, civil political transition leading to credible general elections, end quote. These events, by the way, follow months of protest in the country over corruption, the state of the country's elections, and economic mismanagement. In our next story, Belarusian opposition candidate Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has made a direct call in English to EU leaders from Lithuania. She's asking for their assistance in her fight with Alexander Lukashenko. And she has formed, by the way, a 35-person council to administer a transfer of power. So things are getting heated there. We've had a few guests on to talk about this recently. We'll be talking about it more soon. It seems like Belarus, which has had decades of more or less political stability, it seems like that's quickly undergoing a change in political fates for Lukashenko there on the high levels. And in my last story today, I'm going to wrap it up with this one. Last and arguably the least, chocolate snow has fallen on a Swiss town. This is a good story. The Lindt and Sprüngli company confirmed local reports on Tuesday that there was a minor defect in the cooling ventilation for a line for roasted cocoa nibs in its factory in Olten between Zurich and Basel. So combined with strong winds, on Friday morning, the powder spread around the immediate vicinity of the factory that left a fine cocoa dusting. One car was lightly coated. The particles were reportedly completely harmless. Okay, there's more serious stuff in the news, but there was chocolate snow in the world just the other day, tomorrow. Anyway, that's the news. Those are our top headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, Jamarl, what is your top priority for today?
So my top priority for today, Shane, I am going to just say it right now. I am done watching the convention. I just can't justify the waste of time. It is so fake, it is so phony, it's so hypocritical, so weird, and frankly, for millions of people who actually wanted to get real things done in this particular term, it is a penis in the eye level of disrespect. Now, forgive the base metaphor, but I struggle to find another apt description of what I've been seeing taking place. Does the Democratic Party really need to spike the football on how irrelevant they regard millions of people that regard themselves as the Democratic Party's base, the battered spouses of the political spectrum? It's rather astonishing when you think about it. The Democratic Party power brokers have moved so far to the right that a parade of Republicans now find themselves so thoroughly comfortable that they're giving speeches at the DNC convention. Some are even taking swipes at the Democratic Party base during the Democratic Party convention speeches. More profound, considering that the people invited for this moment of pompous bloviating are the exact same people responsible for degrading the condition of this nation to such a degree that Trump became viable in 2016 and the socialists nearly ran away with it in 2020. But yeah, let's just go with it's all Trump's fault. By the way, the idea of big tent is nonsense. The reality is you have dollars or you have pitchforks. And for the last 40 years, you've only had dollars with a soothing rhetoric to describe the difficulties of a nation in place of having an actual ideology, or for that matter, even an incentive structure that would incentivize you to do anything about those real issues. Talk about it. maybe throw somebody with a particular identity in there, but not deal with the real economic concerns to ameliorate the hard edges of our current environment. Your political space attuned itself to the docility of the population and rationally oriented its workable point of view to one that would facilitate the acquisition of those dollars. 80-year-old men sliding down a pole with the highest bidder dragging a credit card through their saggy butt cheeks. Again, base, but apt. 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash. The politics and the reason that Joe Biden and the Democratic Party leadership can be discussed in several ways, meaning the reason they're acting this way can be discussed in several ways. But there are two clear points and objectives. In the overt sense, Joe Biden is seeking to maintain balance. For example, when Donald Trump attacks Joe Biden as being soft on crime and will defund the cops and all this other nonsense, Joe Biden wanted somebody he could pass off as black to ameliorate the argument that, oh, you're taking blacks for granted. He wanted a female, he wanted her to have profile, but also she's a cop. And the fact that she's a cop makes the other stuff looks kind of silly when Donald Trump says it. It's a balance. Not necessarily to go beyond it, to balance the equation. The same thing is true with the beauty pageant that's taking place. The attack that Trump and Republicans have harped on is Biden is controlled by Bernie Sanders and AOC and the radical left. Now, it's ludicrous, untethered to any notion of reality, and yet, here we have Republicans dancing about the DNC convention. By subverting Donald Trump's key attacks, Biden has chosen not to destabilize the race. The systemic factors that are drowning Trump and allowed to continue to drown Trump. COVID-19, millions unemployed, millions people being evicted, millions without health care, near continuous protests. Biden has made the choice to not add himself to that equation in any particular provocative way that could have unpredictable consequences. He's trying to ninja walk his way to the White House. He did this, by the way, in the initial stages of the primary, the invisible man. I promise each and every American only that I will not be Donald Trump. My name is Joe Biden. Vote for Biden or vote for the other guy. The second part to this is just like in 2016 that the Democratic leadership and their donors, quote unquote, chase Reagan Democrat voters for the straightforward reason that they are your replacements. If you have to pay a fry cook a living wage, what does the owner say? I swear I'm going to put in a robot that's going to do that job for a nickel cheaper. The goal is to mitigate weakness. If you're playing any kind of chess game, this is just something that's known. You strengthen your weak spots. Third-way Democrats and oligarchs throwing quarters at those third-way Democrats were seeking a means to solidify their station against a resurgent left that has gotten more strident in their demands and have realized that those demands are popular, particularly ensuring that each and every American has health care, especially since we're in the middle of a pandemic. 88% Democratic support, and they don't buy it. They don't buy it. Now, if you can bring on a percentage of right-wingers, you can hypothetically gain enough Republicans where you can offset, isolate, pacify, and thoroughly ignore your prior base. Now, the argument of you have nowhere else to go can have an extra oomph to it when you can also make the point that you've been replaced from the right. And ideologically, considering their donors and what their donors want, and people like Bloomberg and all of these other people who were freaked out when Sanders and Warren got into the race, ideologically, it fits their donors. One last point that I'm not entirely going to be able to get through. But when the Democrats were polled regarding who they wanted to hear, AOC came out on top. Flat fact. Anti-choice, union-busting Republican John Kasich got a full spot where he took the moment to say, people on the extreme, whether they're on the left or the right, they get outsized publicity to turn to define their party. You know, I listen to people all the time make these statements, and because AOC gets outside publicity doesn't mean she represents the Democratic Party. To make a point, and I'll be succinct, the majority of Democrats, the majority of Americans agree with Medicare for all. They agree with a non-corporate driven Green New Deal that can create all of these great jobs in the green market. They agree that a wealth tax or increasing taxes on the rich. They agree with expansion of Social Security. They agree with elimination of student debt and making public colleges free. They agree with not using the military as a jobs program and actually making those jobs. They agree with those things. Those are the things she agrees with. So how are you going to make the argument that she is somehow extreme or out of sync? She is not. You are. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault lines. We are talking.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Tune in every Wednesday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker and John Kiriakou for a regular segment called Beyond Nuclear, where Brian and John discuss nuclear issues, including weapons, energy, waste, and the future of nuclear technology in the United States, with Kevin Camps, the radioactive waste watchdog at the organization Beyond Nuclear. Listen on Wednesdays right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we're back, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're taking calls, by the way, 202-521-1320. Again, our phone number, if you want to call it, is 202-521-1320. If you just so happen to be in the Washington, D.C. area, you can listen to us there on the radio. We're on 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We are also on in Kansas City, 102.9 FM, 104.7 FM, and 1140 AM. Oh, and if you have a computer or a smartphone or a tablet and you like to use the internet sometimes, you can also listen to us there. We're on Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Music, and Spotify. Oh, and we're on YouTube. Oh, we're so many places. Just do a search on YouTube for Fault Lines Radio or Jamarl Thomas. Either one of those will take you to our video channels. On Twitter, just go to twitter.com/faultlinesradio, and our Periscope feed is right up top. Man, we've got to simplify these platforms. Maybe we need a single web page or something like that. We've got let me count it, 10. I think I'm counting 10 different things I'm calling out there. Anyway, I mean, they're better to have them all, I suppose. But Jamarl, I'm actually going to come back. You were giving a monologue again. We're taking calls 202-521-1320, 202-521-1320. That's our number. But Jamarl, I want to come back on your monologue. I have a quick question. What is it about AOC? So I understand. I sort of, there are policies that I've seen AOC talk about. She's obviously smart. I've seen her talking about some of her own stuff, but I also think that she's pretty naive and young. And there's some reasons I don't like her. I wouldn't support her as a sort of leading person in the progressive movement. That's my personal call. Right. Then again, I'm not in the progressive movement necessarily. In some areas at least. But what do you like about her? What is it? What do you find appealing? What's good? Again, not coming from a super critical perspective, but sort of just a arm's length one. There's somewhere I'm going with this.
AOC, basically.
Exactly.
So here's the thing. It's not so much, and this is going to sound real strange in an odd way, but it's not so much that it's something about AOC. It's something about the way AOC is perceived. When she took down Crowley, she became somewhat of a juggernaut. And she considered herself a democratic socialist. She said, I want a wealth tax. I want this. I want that. And when people heard that stuff, they were like, oh, there's no way. That's nonsense. And then Fox News was shocked when they realized, oh, wow, our viewers do want this. Our viewers do want that. It's not so much that everything she says is going to be gold. That's not, nobody's going to have everything that's going to be gold per se. And like anybody else, she's 29. She's growing. She's going to be learning as she grows. She's going to get more solidified in her points of view and those type of things. So, I don't judge her on this kind of scale separate from me judging anybody else. The thing is that when she started saying that stuff, she was saying stuff that was pretty outside of the typical political space that the Democrats and Republicans kind of go with. By the same token, it ended up being popular. So you may disagree with her saying, abolish the cops or defund the cops. And I don't like that saying per se. I think it's too diminutive for the moment, but I don't like the saying. I don't even like the politics of the saying because it doesn't necessarily play well politically. But from the standpoint of, yes, we have a Green New Deal. The public says, yeah, we agree with that. We should have a wealth tax. The public says, yes, we agree with that. We should have Medicare for all. The public says, we agree with that. So, it's not so much that everything she says is going to be something that people agree with. But when you have somebody who just comes out of nowhere, takes down a guy who was there for 20 years, the media wasn't paying attention to it at all, and all of a sudden media dumps all of this limelight on her. All of that stuff plays well into the political space. And so I don't, it's nobody who I think you should idolize or throw your allegiance behind. It's kind of just uncompromising where it's like, oh, I worship you or whatever. But yeah. I do think that there are people who do a really great job when they try to present a point, and they do it unapologetically, and it draws attention, especially when it's part of those things become, yeah, we agree with that stuff, even though there may be other stuff about it I don't like.
But yeah, no,
That's all there
that
is.
makes sense.
I don't know what
can
else
see
there
that.
is. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It'd be interesting to do a case study and look at her election, to just actually look at the back and forth in terms
How
of
she took down Crowley.
how exactly
The Crowley thing was fascinating,
how
man.
that happened.
I mean, Crowley had the machine from the standpoint of the Democratic Party, and you have this kind of thing where she's hitting him on this notion of just like, look, we should have Medicare for all, we should have this, we should have that, and she's doing a grassroots campaign versus cash, and it shocked everybody. And when it shocked Crowley, it sent shivers down all of these other Democrats, many of which that just got taken out of their seat recently. Because basically what it boiled down to is you have people who've been in the party for a very long time, and you have others who've been outside of the party that is tired of it, who's gotten to a point of a level of desperation where the old trick and old habits that they typically use to keep these guys out doesn't entirely work. Also, you had the protests, and the protests lifted many of these groups to the point of relevance. Even the person who just got taken out, I can't think of his name. Bowman, I believe, is the person. But it's something shaky, and it's something that these guys are trying to hold back. And keep in mind, if you remember, the DCCC and the DSCC, meaning for the Senate, passed rulings that basically said anybody that's going to try to help take out an incumbent will get blacklisted. Meaning no Ilhan Omars, no AOCs, no none of those people anymore. We want to stop that. And basically they were trying to hold back the night of these candidates. Like, so they took that very seriously when Crowley was taken out of this seat, and they took it as a civil war.
We've got to talk about that more. Yeah, we've got to talk about that. I don't know much about that. I wanted to get to one thing real quick, and then we have callers, so I think we should talk about that later. But that's very interesting. I don't know about that. And I want to hear about that on radio, and I'm sure some other folks would too. Real quick on this. I mean, the age thing is what everybody points out about AOC. I was just checking because I wanted to just, get the temperature, see actually where you were coming from. I mean, the age is on the one hand is trivial, but on the other hand seems pretty damn important. On the one hand, of course, it's trivial because it shouldn't frankly matter other than whatever baseline level of political experience or competence you'd expect from somebody with a given age. But on the other hand, I think there's this generational thing, and I think you're talking about the DSCC, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, talking about trying to keep incumbents in and keep sort of dissidents or upstarts or just even new people out. I mean, that fits in completely, and there's the potential for a generational takeover of different political wings on a sort of case-by-case basis, or just in general. We're probably going to see a lot of that stuff happening over the next 5, 10 years in general. I'm curious, and I want to go to calls with this probably. I'm curious if that can take place within the current Democratic Party, or if you're going to have something outside of it. And frankly, I'm sick of criticizing the Democrats. It would be so much more fun to have something new and better to criticize a little bit less and to admire a little bit more. But we'll see how long that takes.
I would love to be euphoric coming onto the channel. Like, oh wow, we're doing this and we're going to do that and we're going to the moon, and I would love to be that person.
At least you'd still have something to fight against, but at least you'd have a little bit more to fight for. And I think that would be
makes the world a better place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we should go to calls. We've got Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's going on? And Tarif, it's going once. Tarif, just want to try one more time. Tarif, are you on?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we have you on now. There we go.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, okay, you can hit. Okay. A third party. So people gotta start looking at a third party. Okay. I have three comments. People talk about cashless society and talking about these tracking apps and all that, but you have the sun is going to another phase dealing with a solar storm. I put a link.
Okay, let's go to our next caller. Tarif, you can call back if you get the chance. Let's go to Malcolm.
Yeah, we got Malcolm.
He has a comment on Kamala Harris. Yeah.
Exactly.
Malcolm, are you here?
It's Michael from Sydney, Australia.
Oh, Michael, how's it
Well,
going?
we have a few of you. It looks like Michael's on right now. We're having some problem in the audio. No, Michael, while you're on, Michael calling in from Sydney. What's going on?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to say I'm not dead, despite the deficits of the deep state. I'm not, and I didn't go to hospital either, which I'm really proud of. And the second thing I'd like to say is like Kamala Harris. I mean, what the F? And the third thing I'd like to say is about AOC. I mean, like, I don't share the same optimism. I'm on your side, Shane. She has basically refused to endorse many candidates who are to the left of her and just as left as her. And I think she's basically a stalking horse for the Democratic Party to have some pretense of independence. And just the fourth thing I would just say is the reason I haven't called in lately is for my own mental.
Okay, Michael, thank you. I appreciate the call. Look,
He cut
I
out
think
there.
when people,
Wait, what did he say?
yeah, I didn't hear the last thing, but he said because he wasn't for something. But I'm just going to say thank you, Michael, for the call, even though we didn't hear exactly the last point. Look, I will say this, that when people look at the Democratic Party, you can't look at the Democratic Party as if it's one thing. It's not monolithic. It's like anything else. You have competing factions. And right now you have a faction that's been in power for the last 40, 50 years, third-way Democrats, the Obamaites, the Clintonites, the Bidens, the party that formed together like Voltron in order to form one mighty fist to punch Sanders in the face to stop him from getting over the contest. It wasn't Sanders versus all of these people. It was just Sanders versus one aspect of the party, meaning two factions going at it. These factions represent millions. And it just so happens that the party that is in power has a point of view that is governed by cash every bit as much as the Republican Party. They hate the progressive wing of that party, meaning Kamala Harris is not going to support somebody to the left of her because to the left of her is not on the same team. When you look at it, don't take my word for it. Look at it. It's a civil war that has taken place in the Democratic Party for the last 8 years. And I think in 2020, 2016 was more raw and more clarified. 2020 felt like a fake contest, if I'm being honest. Because Sanders wasn't willing to do what his rhetoric required. Meaning, if I say the world is going to end in 10 years because of climate change, but we're going to incrementally find a way to deal with it. Well, wait a minute. You just said the world was going to end. Don't we have to take pretty extravagant action to stop that? It's kind of that. If you're telling me we got to fight the billionaires, we got to fight the DNC, we got to fight the whatever, and then you come out and say, but I can't hit the avatar of those things, Joe Biden, because he's my buddy. So I'm sorry for all of those people without health care. I apologize.
I just want to make a quick. There's one quick point I want to make here. I'm just thinking about it right now. Usually these ones that are just hot off the stove, they're not ready for human consumption. So this is probably a mistake.
Those are the best.
But I mean, here's another way of looking at it. If you look back at 2016, the reason that at the end of the day, Bernie, for all of his personal character quirks or defects or however you want to put it, all that stuff aside, the reason that he was so hesitant to push back against the DNC might have just been that he was going up against Trump, and Trump, from mid to late 2015 on, was painted as the worst possible boogeyman, increasingly so. Yes. But really at that point in the middle of 2016 when Bernie made those moves, he was the true bad guy of all bad guys. I mean, there's a very simple point to be made here, which is, isn't the demonization of your political opposition itself a sort of negative influence, a negative incentive from your party's perspective? Do you see what I'm saying there? That
it is.
If you overstate how bad the opposition is, then all you make it about is defeating them instead of pushing for your own morality, your own policies, your own beliefs. I think there's something basic there. I don't want to make too much out of it, but we're going to have to go into a break. Maybe we can talk about this later. Don't mean to co-opt the last part of that segment. We can come back to it.
No, that's perfect. I'm writing it down now. That's perfect.
Awesome. All right, yeah, we'll catch up with it. We're talking with Ted Rall next. We'll be back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
On Sputnik with Max Kaiser and Stacey Herbert. Tune in. Well, maybe mention like central bankerism and markets are doubling down. Not you're saying everybody's doubling down. They're crazy.
They are. Everyone's crazy.
Catch all the breaking global political and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. There have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially, but in practice.
Peter Sunde, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
Increased activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usual flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that, in a pipeline dispute, that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan. We're coming to you live out of our station from Washington, D.C. If you guys want to catch us on the radio, you can catch us at 105.5 FM, 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. Joining us right now, we have political cartoonist and syndicated columnist Ted Rall. Ted, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jamal. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So I want to pick up on something that Shane ended with, because I love the way he put it. He was talking about the demonization of opponents, meaning in a political space where all the incentives drive you to win, and that incentive gets you to be that much more hostile to your opponent. But at a certain point, you have to live with that opponent. You have to walk out there and shake that guy's hand, and you've just made that guy seem like Satan himself. He made the point that is it possible that Bernie Sanders basically was bought into the notion that Trump was indeed an apocalypse, and that regardless of whether I was cheated, regardless of whether I was over a barrel, it didn't really matter. That the Democratic Party was willing to tank it. I am not willing to tank it. I am too much Christ-like. And so it is better for me to just give it over, give all my support to whoever it is, and just fight from there. Is that what it is? I mean, is it really as simple and bare bones as, look, Trump is that bad. I can't take the chance of putting him in there. If that means Hillary Clinton or if that means Joe Biden, so be it.
Well, it's either that or it's two other possibilities as well. One is that, that the Democratic Party has basically absorbed him like the Borg, and he sold out, and he caucuses with the Democrats. He is de facto a Democrat. The criticisms that were waged against him in 2016 and in this cycle were that he wasn't loyal enough to the Democratic Party. So he's, just like joining a mafia organization, he's proving his bona fides, kind of the way that Colin Powell did when he went up before the UN and lied about Iraq's anthrax and WMDs when he knew he was lying. And there's also, I guess, a third possibility, which is that he basically doesn't. He's tired of fighting. I think when you're outside the duopoly, when you've been mocked and ridiculed, you see this a lot with lefties. They just get tired when they get old. I can see how that can happen. I'm 56 and I've been outside the duopoly for a long time, and I think you look at it and you're like, well, maybe before I die. I want to make sure that I'll get a good obituary in the New York Times that doesn't just characterize me as a spoiler, the way that, say, Ralph Nader will get after he dies. And I think people just get tired. So it's going to be one of those three things. I mean, the practical effect of it, regardless of what's going on in Bernie's mind, is that it is selling out, and it is disappointing. I mean, progressives represent about 37% of American voters, and they deserve to have a standard bearer who is as uncompromising for them as Donald Trump is for his people. And they don't have that in Bernie Sanders, not when you see him talk the way he did at the convention.
I so agree with you on that. I think, honestly, to me, it's the last one. I think you probably got tired. I mean, if this was Sanders at 50, is it going to be a difference as opposed to Sanders at 80? And like you say, age wears on a person. It's not so much that the age in and of itself was, let's say, degrading the faculty of the person. It's more so that the physicality of a person weakens. They get tired. And it's like you have to be out there, like you said, ridicule, push back on that stuff constantly. People calling you bad names, the media going after you, going after your supporters. And it takes a certain amount of energy just to even put up with that. Whereas Joe Biden was just the default. So he didn't have to deal with that stuff. And even now, it seems like Biden is just coasting. Do you think that policy of coasting works? Now, the catch here is if you coast, you have to deal with the fact that Donald Trump is still president. And while you are in your basement, Donald Trump can make wildly moves that may actually find something that works, like in regards to some level of attack. Because right now it just seems like Donald Trump is, clinching in the darkness. I made the point that Bannon and the arguments that Bannon made that was basically to the left of what the Republican Party is. It almost takes him back to the 2016 argument and message. Can Biden stay in that basement in the way that he was trying to do in the initial stages of the campaign? Or is this race going to tighten in a way that Biden is going to have to actually engage, or he's going to have to put himself on the line? And I guess this is, prognostication, so fair enough.
I mean, look, could Biden win with this coasting and hiding strategy? Sure, it's possible, but it's not. Historically, it's unlikely. And I think when you're running a campaign, you want to make sure that you're being as aggressive as possible in terms of articulating an affirmative vision of what you actually stand for, as opposed to what the other person stands for. Otherwise, the subtext of the current campaign is it's a referendum on Donald Trump. And what that means is that Donald Trump is the active ingredient and you're the inert gas. And Biden's just not doing anything right now. I don't look. This race will absolutely tighten as we head toward November 3rd. There's no question about that. And there's also, it's odd to see the Democratic Party with sort of a lack of an affirmative vision. For example, one of their big talking points yesterday was about health care. And, when I saw the headline, I was like, wait, did Biden change his mind and now he supports Medicare for all? And when I read, they said, no, in fact, he hasn't changed his position. He said he would veto Medicare for all. It's just merely that the Democratic Party will fight against Donald Trump's attempts to gut the Affordable Care Act. So in other words, just playing defense. And I guess you could say that having the ACA is better than having no ACA, but it's not a way that's going to get your hardcore supporters to the polls. What we're looking at is very, very long lines in a chaotic situation. We had long lines in many places in the last cycle, but this time is going to be the longest lines in U.S. history. So you're asking people to go really grossly inconvenience themselves. Are they really going to get up and vote for Joe Biden, given the fact that he's not articulating a very interesting or even, I wouldn't even say progressive, but even a traditionally liberal Democratic agenda? I mean, Trump's people are going to show up. Biden's people, maybe, maybe not. And that's not a good place to be.
Basically, accept my apathy. I'm going to be a physical body that is not Donald Trump, and you better love me for it. And then it's like, yeah, but what are you going to do in that office? I think the saddest part, honestly, about what has been taking place in this particular campaign has been, it's as if there's no government. And let me explain what I mean by that. You basically have, under normal circumstances, your government kind of this kind of conceptual model, and people are out there, they're doing things to make sure that the country ticks along. And when there's nothing going on, you have political bickering. And when your country is relatively stable, it allows the political actors to get a little bit more rowdier because the country is a little bit more stable. It can take it. But you have a pandemic where the economy was literally shut down. Right now, the government is basically holding up the entire economy by just putting out money to people in order to keep it running. And on top of that, you have all of these people that have died, all of these people that are ill. Many of the people that are ill have additional illnesses because of weaknesses that was created by the COVID virus. Like, this is not a good place to be. And the rancor that's in government is an election with one candidate that is just unimaginative and laying in his basement hoping that he could just coast, and the other one that is making it worse. And America is basically being put to say, look, which one do you want? The guy that's not offering anything, or the guy that may make it worse? Where do you go with that? Yeah, I mean, and maybe that's the problem, right? You have two parties that basically have created the situation to which we have. And the quote-unquote moderates, whatever that means, are now saying, give us the ball. We'll make it right this time.
No, I mean, the problem is, and this is what Ted was getting at, and we'll, of course, going right back to him. We've got to go to a break in just a couple of minutes here, but is this issue that if all you're doing is responding to Trump, like he used the idea of Biden being an inert gas that's effectively doing nothing, that's effectively acting as some sort of causal reagent or something, but responding principally to Trump. The problem is that Trump actually, as far as I can tell, isn't a by the party policy guy. It doesn't make sense to respond to him in terms of traditional, even recent contemporary Democrat Republican Party politics, because he's kind of a weird wild card in a lot of different areas.
He doesn't care.
And additionally, I think that the fact that we're in this medical crisis, we're in various world crises, from the start of the year with an earthquake and the assassination of another world leader, but especially with the pandemic and now economic slump, Wall Street be damned. With all that stuff going on, I mean, you guys are both to the left, and I understand why you're pushing the Democrats to be actually democratic in the sense of representing the left wing. But just from my perspective, I don't have any real fondness for them. But what I would like to see is some genuine opposition in terms of ideas, not even ideological ideas, but simply ideas that are better than Trump's about how to solve current economic problems, how to push what to push for, even action. I mean, the fact that Trump is riding the upward wave of positive opinion from his executive orders, it seems that he still is. We'll see what the polls keep saying, and how the actual election goes. But the fact that Congress couldn't do anything, the fact that neither the Democrats nor Republicans in Congress could do anything, and that it had to fall to Trump as the backstop there is ridiculous. And so I don't even care about the party stuff. I just like to see some genuine alternatives here. Ted, in our last minute or two, what's your take on that?
Well, obviously, I agree with that. We look at if we look at the historical analogy, I think the best one to our current situation is 1932, and it's hard. You had a Herbert Hoover who was basically doing nothing to stimulate the economy or get America out of the Depression, and the country was spiraling out of control. FDR ran with a very aggressive New Deal agenda that was able to sort of give hope that if elected, he might not solve the problem, but he'd be working hard on it. You don't see that with Joe Biden's campaign, at least at this stage. You don't see that at all. One thing that you mentioned also, I think, is very right. It is a test of personalities, and right now it's kind of like Donald Trump is like full on honey badger, and Joe Biden, he's like a little mouse. And so, the question is, what's closer to what Americans look for in a president? I think honey badger is closer. It's not ideal, but they want someone who they feel is energetic. And I think, Trump is kind of onto something when he calls him Sleepy Joe. That's the vibe I get too.
I would just point out, I want to add another dimension here. We've got to go into a break, and that was very succinctly put for our break, Ted. Thank you. But neither a honey badger nor a mouse seem like very effective leaders. One is completely irascible and irrational and crazy and will just kill you. And then the other does nothing and hides. as Biden is very clearly doing in his basement, literally. Anyway, we've got to go into a break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a couple of seconds with Ted Rall. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
And we're back, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Rall. We are joined by Ted Rall. He's a political cartoonist and a syndicated columnist. You can follow him, by the way, on Twitter at Ted Rall, TEDRALL, and you can read his cartoons and articles at Rall.com. Great website. I'm going to throw that in, as always. Ted, it seems to me like we live in something of a pinball game where day to day, it's just one new round of crazy satirical events where it's easy to lampoon, it's easy to criticize, and you just keep racking these things up. I don't know how to say it. It's insanity. There's this phrase, clown world, and a lot of people who say it are a little bit too ridiculous with it, or a little bit too critical, or they're kind of dissident in a way that I don't like. But anyway, there is this phrase, clown world. There's something of that in the world that we live in. Just a couple of days ago, just yesterday actually, Susan B. Anthony was pardoned by Trump. By Trump of all people, accused sexual offender. I don't know what to make of this. What do you make of this, Ted?
Well, it's always weird when dead people are pardoned, because I'm always like, well, I mean, it's like, but they're dead. And it's like, it doesn't really, my mother, who is dead, used to say, don't send me flowers to my funeral. Give me flowers now that I'm alive and can appreciate them. So yeah, it's like pardoning the Thanksgiving turkey. It's just those kind of rituals. I think they must have spoken to people at an earlier time in our history. But I don't think that, we can relate. And, it is very odd. I mean, I think Trump's ultimate psychology and campaign style is the troll, and the Sue B. Anthony thing is definitely, sort of an act of trolling the Me Too movement.
It is funny. I mean, and I feel you on that, because my thought. Look, Donald Trump, at the same time when the Democrats were doing their thing, he wanted something to try to intervene, at some level of intervening. Yeah, this was a way of trolling him to do so. I'm curious on the way this race is going to fold out, if I'm being honest. I see no hope in this. And I see hope in long term, just from the standpoint of the way that people seem to be getting a little bit more wowly. But in the short term, I have a dark view of this stuff. Do you think, for the moment, that the people who they're trying to get, like they're parading all of these Republicans out, are they going to get those Republicans? It feels like it's the Republican push for Pennsylvania, where they never get it, they always try for it, but every so often, like they did in the last election, they grab it. Is this going to be the election where they finally get those irascible Republicans that just can't stand Trump, that feel almost at home in the Democratic Party?
I don't think there's such a thing as an anti-Trump Republican. And I think there's hardly such a thing as a swing voter. I think people know how they're going to vote. And Republicans definitely fall in line. They always vote for the nominee, no matter what. And let's not forget, there are fewer Republicans than there are Democrats. So if both parties' voters appeared at the polls in proportionate numbers, Democrats would always win. So what's going on here is that Republicans are always more loyal. Democrats have a more fractured coalition, and they have to. And the key there is to energize the base, which obviously, at least in recent years, they have been going out of their way not to do. It's baffling. Electoral politics, I don't have such a dark view. Electoral politics is completely bankrupt, so I have a dark view of that. But the good news is that's becoming increasingly apparent to everyone, and we have a really vibrant street protest movement for the first time since the late 1960s and early 1970s, and it's an ongoing thing, and I don't see it ending anytime soon, and that's what really matters these days. So that's what gives me hope. People just need to see how ridiculous the two-party system is. One thing I kind of hope is that if Biden wins, I mean, of course, obviously, I hope he'll solve all these big problems, but I know he won't, and I hope that people will start to notice that. One of the things I keep hearing from my Biden-supporting friends is like, well, he's going to appoint this great cabinet, and I'm like, well, you don't know that. Obama never did. He's going to help ordinary people. It's like, well, Obama didn't. It's all, so maybe if they need to be disappointed again, and they need to notice it to realize that there's no real hope in with the Democrats.
Ted, how many times can they be disappointed? How many times? Like, this is honestly, man, this is like 40 years. Like in real talk, this has been like 40 years, and they would get a person. Obama would scream hope and change. Nobody knows what that means, but it feels joyous and euphoric. So yes, it's euphoric politics. And it means nothing. It means just, Clinton politics, neoliberalism on steroids, even pushing for the Trans-Pacific Partnership at a moment where Hillary Clinton is trying to, moonwalk out of it and is basically saying, look, I don't really care if the majority of the public doesn't like it. I'm still going to go through with it. It didn't seem to change anything. The moment that Hillary Clinton ran in, all of those people kicked back in action, blue no matter who, you got to choose Hillary Clinton regardless. And they, it's like the trumpet just starts back up. The band starts back up every 4 years. And it doesn't necessarily seem to be a connection between you're being played, especially lefties. Like, you're being played. And nevertheless, you end up in the same position again. Like, honestly, how does that stop? How does that get broken? How does the mechanism that allows that thing to work itself get broken in a way that people can finally actually organize in a way where they advocate for affirmative politics as opposed to a race to the bottom?
Well, I would like to think that there would be one big moment of realization, Alleluia Moment. The sun comes out from behind the cloud and everyone gets it. I don't think it's going to work that way. I think it's more a subtle societal shift that's just gradually occurring, and then one day we wake up and we realize it has happened. Sort of like, when I was a kid, people smoked everywhere, including like in hospitals and in grocery stores and on the plane, and then at some point people just sort of got tired of it, and there were subtly over time more non-smokers than smokers, and then the non-smokers got more irritated, and then they got louder, and now you can't smoke pretty much anywhere. And what was there a single moment that caused that shift? No, and I think it's going to be the same way here. More and more Democrats are just realizing what's going on, and they're just not voting. I mean, Bernie Sanders, I think, was the result of that. I mean, Bernie Sanders didn't change. I was in the room. I interviewed him just like a week or two after he announced. He was running like 1.5% in the polls. This was a guy who was not expecting to speak to stadiums full of 12,000 people, or much less, energize youthful voters. He was just trying to wage a sort of symbolic from the left primary challenge to influence the platform a little bit. That's all he was hoping for, and it caught. And so the fact that he became this unlikely standard bearer for progressivism in America it gives us hope that there is this yearning on the left for something better. I think there's also a yearning on the right for something better, but this is definitely I think it's more articulated on the left, and it's out there. Black Lives Matter is part of it. You can just sort of feel it shifting slowly, seismically.
I think that's fair. You've given me a certain degree of hope in that, honestly, because you're right. If you think about Medicare for All is my litmus test. When Obama was running, Obama the funniest thing in the world. And I think people forget this so easily. But if you remember, Obama was arguing against a mandate, individual mandate. Hillary Clinton was arguing for it. And Obama, in multiple debates, pointed at her and said, look, the insurance company is going to love you for this because those places are probably going to get more business with your individual mandate. And Obama, I'm not going to do it. And then at the moment that Clinton was gone, he appropriated the individual mandate. And any notion of a public option went out the window. And his point was to appease many of those healthcare companies and everything else. So he ended up with this kind of watered down bill from the Heritage Foundation that basically these guys let Congress write. Now, Medicare for All wasn't even on the table. 4 years later, you have this fight over a healthcare plan called Medicare for All that grows up to be 88% in the polls. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. And maybe my problem here is to have 88% Democratic support and to have the House, Senate, and the presidential candidate for the Democratic Party to basically tell that person to kick rocks. It bothers me. Like, let me ask you this. What do you say to lefties who's listening to this conversation, can agree with everything that we've just said here, but say Donald Trump is an animal and he's going to end the world? Even though you guys are right, I have to do this. I have a social responsibility to do this. What do you say to them?
Well, I would say that we've been told in election after election that every election is the most important election in our lifetimes, and that building a left alternative in the streets and in the form of a third party is always something that's going to have to wait. Life doesn't wait. You know, we have Americans live an average of 78 years. We don't live forever. We need to. It takes time to build a new party. It takes time to build street activism, and you better get started now. So, and the other thing is, I would say, like, okay, Donald Trump is an animal, but historically, look at first and second terms. They usually have very little to do with one another. Everybody's saying, well, Donald Trump will be much worse and more effective in his second term. That's completely nonsensical. It's the exact opposite. There is no evidence to support that at all, but there's considerable evidence to support the theory that a second term is almost not even worth running for when you're a president. You're a lame duck. You're dealing with scandal. You know Trump will be. They'll probably impeach him again. He's the Republicans themselves in like Mitch McConnell and those guys. They're not going to need or be as afraid of Trump in a second term as they were in the first. Like, you show me a president in his second term, and I will show you a president who didn't get anything done, and that includes FDR. His second term was worthless. He only got his mojo back with the beginning of World War II in his third term. So it's like highly unlikely that this extremely weird personality is going to somehow manage to transform his second term into something that's going to radically transform this country more than he already has. I wouldn't worry that much about it.
You guys are listening to Ted Rawl?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Shane.
I was
just going to say you guys...
Exactly.
Oh, go ahead, Shane. I'm sorry.
Cartoonist, political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. Ted, thanks. We only have about a minute left. So we're in that sort of awkward no man's land here. One thing, I wanted to come back with you on swing voters. There was something interesting you said, actually. Maybe we do have 20, 30 seconds, something like that. You were talking a little while back about how there's people basically vote for who they vote for. Where does that leave swing voters? They've always seemed sort of coquettish to me, but where does that leave them in our political process? Just briefly, Ted.
I think Donald Trump proved that swing voters don't matter. It's all about energizing your base. The swing voter thing is a relic of Dick Morris and the triangulation model of the 1990s and Bill Clinton. And frankly, Bill Clinton would not have won with it if Ross Perot hadn't sucked away so many votes from George H.W. Bush. So I think the whole chasing down swing voters is like, it's there's basically only about 6% of the voters swing voters, and they can make a difference, and you'd want them. You want every vote, but I wouldn't. Again, it's far more effective to rally your base than it is to chase swing voters.
I hear you. It's marginal politics. Interesting stuff to look up there. Thank you for joining us. That was the voice of Ted Rawl, political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. We will be back in a minute with another 2 hours of the most disruptive show in American politics, Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
In the politically independent corner, standing softly by a stream, staring wistfully into the wind, I am your investigative political analyst, Jane Stranahan.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So let's get to some headlines in the news. The TV ratings are in, and the DNC convention has struggled to get America to care. In one place, it could be blamed on the virtual nature of the ceremony, but it could also be related to the people not all that much concerned about a candidate receiving the overwhelming lion's share of his support, not for his policies, but for not being Trump. Newsweek is reporting that, quote unquote, in all 5.8 million people tuned in to the first night of the Democratic National Convention, down a whopping 50% from 11.6 million that tuned in to the first night of the party convention 4 years ago. Newsweek notes that, quote, at the DNC YouTube channel, a replay of Michelle Obama's 18-minute primetime speech was viewed just 4,000 times in 10 hours. Even Sanders lost his shine with 8-minute speech taking over 12 hours to crack just 1,000 views. USPS Postmaster General Louis DeJoy says in a statement that he is suspending operational changes until the 2020 election. Quote, to avoid the appearance of any impacted election mail, I am suspending these initiatives until after the election has concluded. Now, this is a little too late. The tension of the nation, including protests outside of DeJoy's house, gained steam as he made drastic changes to the operation of the Postal Service that forced dysfunction that in one sense ran in parallel with DeJoy's financial interests. In the recent reporting in the New York Times, DeJoy owns $10 million worth of investment in a company that directly competes with the Postal Service. In another sense, perhaps even more disturbing, is the actions that Louis DeJoy is taking as head of the USPS that ran lockstep with President Donald Trump's rhetoric, who basically said the quiet part out loud, admitting that his interest was to cripple the voting by mail as it was somehow less electorally safe than absentee voting, a claim that has been demonstrated to be false. A lie. DeJoy is scheduled to speak before Congress this Friday. It's official. Joe Biden has officially won the Democratic nomination on the second night of the Democratic National Convention. At 10:05 p.m., the votes from the great state of North Carolina clinched the nomination with a total of 2,374 votes for one Joe Biden. Biden officially received 83 votes from the state, with Sanders receiving 39. Overall, Biden finished with 3,558 votes, while Sanders ended up with 1,151. U.S. Representative and progressive firebrand Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez spoke for less than 2 minutes on the second night of the Democratic National Convention, where she seconded the nomination of Bernie Sanders for president. Per DNC aid, anyone that has 300 delegates going into the convention can put their name in the nomination. Only Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders met the threshold. This is the roll call vote, ahead of which AOC spoke for Sanders. NBC News is reporting that COVID-19 is spreading through schools, but federal government is not tracking the outbreaks, and some states have chosen not to report the information, making it difficult to accurately gauge the information on the virus propagation among staff, kids, and transmission beyond the schools. Scores of students and staff have been quarantined due to the potential exposure in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Indiana, in addition to other states. NBC News is reporting that researchers say that the absence of a comprehensive accounting is hampering efforts to identify which safety practices can best prevent cases in schools from spreading. Australia's Prime Minister says his country should make a coronavirus vaccine, quote, as mandatory as you can possibly make it, adding that there are always exemptions for any vaccine on medical grounds, but it should only be on that basis. I find that disturbing for some reason. I want to talk about that. The Mortgage Bank Association says that the record number of home loans backed by Federal Housing Association, 16% of them, are now delinquent, signaling the effects of the pandemic. This also goes into over 30% of people not being able to pay their rents in August and in July, and the millions of evictions are expected going by the end of the year. The president and the prime minister of Mali resigned and were taken to a military camp near capital of Bamako following a military coup yesterday, a move that has been harshly criticized by international observers. In a televised address, President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta said he wanted no blood spill to keep him in power. A spokesperson for the soldier is calling for a civil political transition leading to credible general elections. These events follow months of protests over corruption, election, and economic mismanagement. Belarusian opposition candidate Svetlana has made a direct call to EU leaders from Lithuania asking for their assistance in her fight with Alexander Lukashenko, and has formed a 35-person council to administer a transfer of power. And last but not least, Shane's favorite, chocolate snow. Chocolate snow falls on a Swiss town, the Lindt, and the Spurlegi company confirmed local reports on Tuesday that there was a minor defect in the cooling ventilation for the line for roasted cocoa nibs in its factory in Olten between Zurich and Bissau. Combined with strong winds on Friday morning, the powder spread around the immediate vicinity of the factory, leaving a fine cocoa dust. One car was lightly coated, and the particles that were reportedly completely harmless. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. There is so much in this I want to talk about. So let me just say the first thing. My wife, when we travel and we get like 2 weeks vacation, what we try to do is hit 2 locations. She chooses one, I choose one. And there's some locations that are just random. It's like, I want to go to Iceland. What's in Iceland? Iceland is Iceland. That's all I need. One of the places was Brussels. And she was like, I don't want to go to Brussels. I don't see the point of going to Brussels. And then I told her, you know, there's chocolate there, right? They have all of this chocolate in this place. She loved it. Absolutely loved it.
It's true.
So when I hear this,
it's true. They're famous.
I think of that. Yeah, they are. That was the
big
point I was trying to
contest
make
between the. Exactly, you know, the Belgians. You have the Belgians. You have the Swiss. That really is. I see that the sort of principal European contest. Just in general, that of all contests, that is the principal one. That's the most important one. No, I mean Switzerland in a weird way is looking like a 2020 safe haven. It is looking like potentially the place to be. I've got to say, I mean, long time ago when I was like 18, we are taking calls, by the way, 202-521-1320. Not necessarily on this next topic. When I was 18, I went on my first sort of like big international trip. I'd gone to stay on a farm in Canada, and that was cool. And then I went on this longer hitchhiking trip in Europe. Started out in England and then kind of ended in Italy. Ended early because I got pneumonia. And I got pneumonia in Switzerland. I was hiking around for a couple of weeks, mostly just walking literally, but hitched a few rides too before heading to Italy finally. And Switzerland, the Alps there, it's just the most beautiful thing. That's if I could go to one place in Europe right now, maybe not literally right now, but actually maybe right now, it would be there, and I would bring like a bike and a tent and a water filter. Oh, they have some natural springs up there, and I just bike Switzerland for a couple of weeks. That'd be amazing. Anyway, back to the news
on YouTube the sledding in Switzerland, and this guy would get on his skateboard, and he would go down the cliffs, those Alps that you were saying. So he would get on those things and be going like 70 miles an hour on his skateboard, and it is the most it's the wildest thing in the world. It's like, oh my God, that guy's going to die. My trip thing. Let me
It
talk about
sounds
my
like
trip
so
thing for
much
a
fun.
moment. So
Wait,
I didn't
yeah, go
travel
for it.
until I was 30. Well, I didn't get to travel until I was 30. And, you know, I told you before, kidney failure started for me when I was 17. And so there's a thing in me that bristles against this notion of pushback. Meaning I want to be an individual. I have this libertarian streak. And in my head, it's like, I want to go travel. Now, I got a transplant. Transplant failed. And so my thought was, all right, I have 7 months that I can go before this gets to the point where my body would degrade and I would die. And so, screw it. Let's do it. I'm going to go. I booked a trip to Amsterdam and I smoked a ton of pot for 3 days. And I got on a plane and then went to Egypt. And I went bumbling around the Middle East for like 30 days. And then going through, how did I get through? I changed my schedule. I ended up going through Israel to Jordan to Nepal, bungee jumping in Nepal, then into India. Now, by the time I got to India, I was so ill that I couldn't hold down food. It had been like weeks, like maybe a week and a half since I had eaten anything. When I tried to, I couldn't keep it down. And I had this kind of conversation with myself because I had just booked a ticket to Bangkok because I'm like, I'm going to Japan. You know, it's like, you must keep going. And in your head, when you get that mindset of, this is what I'm going to do, nothing is going to stop me from this particular thing. There is nothing else that is available to me than finding a solution to, keep me going forward. You will be surprised how far you can go.
Going. Totally.
You could be surprised.
No, that's awesome. No, that's great.
I had a ton to pay for when I got back.
Just to be clear, that was more than 7 months ago, right?
No, this was years ago. This was like back in 2008.
No,
this was during Obama. Yeah.
And
this
you,
when
you
Obama
worked it
was
out.
running. Yeah, I worked it out. I kept going.
No, yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I kept
no,
going.
That's awesome.
I was
that's
buying
fantastic.
meds over the counter. It's like I was buying like Lasix or fluid pills over the counter in Egypt, and they kind of keep. Man, in my head, this is what you were going to do. As I got older, I was more sane in trying to do it. And so the last trip that my wife and I took, there was no way my wife would have ever let me do anything like that. But again, it's like you're scrambling to try to hold all of these things in the air because I got to get a treatment at this place. Okay, how do you get to this trip? Okay, maybe I can go for 7 days without it. And you are planning and you're basically saying, look, there's certain things that I have to leverage. Cash is one of them. Me taking pain, me feeling horrible is part of it also. And you can't take the trip like this if you're not willing to do that. And one of my doctors, I would never forget it. The guy was in Kenya. And he says, so how long are you going to be going? And I said, about 4 months, 5 months. And he says, wait, what do you mean? I said, we're traveling for 4 or 5 months. He said, but you're on dialysis. How does that work? And I was explaining it to him. And he looked at me and he said, we talked for like an hour. And he looked at me and he said, maybe I'm doing my job wrong. And I was like, what do you mean you're doing your job wrong? He says, if I had a patient that wanted to even to go to a wedding, I would bristle at it. Now, I bristle at him saying that he would bristle at it because the point that I made to him is, it's not your life. It's none of your business. It's that guy's life. It's that guy to make the decision. You are a doctor who's giving him advice on X or Y. And unfortunately, our society has gotten to this thing that these guys are authorities, as if this guy's an authority over your life. Like he's going to be paying your rent and your car note and your whatever. Your life. He's subordinate to you and your decisions that you want to make to try to get from point A to point B, even if you die doing it. And so it's like, he's looking at me like, maybe I'm doing my job wrong. And the point I was like, no, you're not doing your job wrong. I said, the problem is that many times people don't appropriate the information that you give them in the context of a life. They just take it as this guy's an authority. And unfortunately, it's hard to shake that because you have people who may die in the process of them trying to figure out where their limits are. And so it's like, it's not taught. It's something that has to be appropriated in regards to a point of view, right? But look, man, I am firmly of the belief. Yeah, it's a fascinating experience. All of those things was fascinating. Skydiving, all that stuff.
It does, yeah. I mean, it's formative. No, go for it. You finish up.
Right. No, I'm just saying, if you want to do stuff, it is... Look, let me say it this way, and I'm sorry to take advantage of this, but I guess my point is, you have a point of view of the world. And sometimes your imagination is so constrained that you can't necessarily see ways around your limits. And look, some of those limits are real. Some of those limits aren't. And it's up to you to find them without dying in the process of doing so. So if anybody is dealing with any kind of illness or anything else, I would say that. Don't die, but also live.
No,
Well,
I think
because it's
that
hard to
should
make
be
that case,
inviolable.
right?
No,
Yeah.
I mean, but that's
Yeah,
like,
but
that's
it's
one of
hard
the
to make
most,
that
that's one of the
case.
most, it can be, but I think the only way to make it, and the only way that it makes sense to make it, is personally, if it's your choice. I mean, fundamentally, if somebody has to make that decision between, just very simply, and this is the crude way to put it, I think, but between quality of life and quantity of life, and that's the crude way to put it. But I really think it's more something like choosing how you want to live despite the limitations, despite the threats. That's very personal, and it should be personal. And I think that all we can do is inform people who are in that position to make the best decision they can for themselves. Anyway, we're going to go into a break. We'll be right back. 202-521-1320. We're taking calls, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Tashawn, what do you want to talk about today? Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We are taking calls this segment. 202-521-1320 is our number. 202-521-1320. Oh, yeah, and I'll do this again. We're on the radio. We're live in Washington, D.C. right now, 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also on in Kansas City, 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM, also 1140 AM. Online, you can listen to us by audio, Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Music, and Spotify. Those are our audio platforms. For video, just go to YouTube and do a search for Fault Lines Radio or Jamarl Thomas, or go to Twitter, twitter.com/FaultLinesRadio, and you'll see our Periscope right up top there. We have some people on the line. 202-521-1320. Feel free to give us a call. Actually, I hear we're having problems literally for right this second with our audio lines. Maybe give us a minute before you try calling back in. Saul, do we have Trudy in California, or is she off right this second? The audience will not hear.
We can't go to her right now.
We can?
Okay.
We cannot. We cannot.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we cannot do that.
Down.
Yeah. At the moment, our phones are down. Weird. It just happened within the past minute. Sometimes if people have been reporting some weird problems, usually it's when they're calling into other shows where it'll go straight to voicemail. We've had people call in successfully to our show to complain about that. Justly.
Yeah.
But tomorrow, what were we going to say?
Totally understand. I want to get to one thing because I think it'll be interesting to talk to you about this. The president and the prime minister of Mali resigned when they were taken to a military camp near the capital of Bamako following a military coup yesterday. The move has been harshly criticized by international observers. That one. Now, do you remember when Evo Morales was taken out also? And he was, escorted to Mexico by military and so forth. People had basically warned him, look, they're going to kill you if you stay here. And he gets away. Now, what he's talked about, he says, look, I don't want to create some kind of civil war in order to stay in power. This guy pretty much said the same thing. I don't want a civil war to stay in power. But what does that mean in real practical terms? That means that basically you've given over some democratic chosen position. And maybe it wasn't there, but definitely in Bolivia. And you've handed it over to fascists and maniacs. And is it right for you to do that as opposed to stand your ground and trying to hold the line on that? Because basically evil is gone, but they're going to have a civil war anyway. Because the indigenous communities that are there realize you've stolen it. This is not any level of us choosing. This is you taking. And there is no legitimacy within the context of you taking. Now, the catch becomes, what's more right? Is it more right for a leader to recognize the legitimacy of his position and hold the line even if it costs thousands of lives? Or is it more right for them to say, look, I'm not going to be involved in this. I'm going to let this go. And what does that mean if you do that and you basically give legitimacy to the very act of undermining democracy itself? Give us your thoughts, Shane.
Well, I mean, with Mali right here, it's weird because a lot of what the protests are about is apparently unjust elections. So,
right. I mean, fair enough. Okay, get Mali out.
This is a crisis of authority in general.
Let's go to Bolivia. Let's do Bolivia.
Well, no. Yeah, any political is going to have its potential downfalls, and whether or not whether it's despotism and various military coups, whether it's a democracy and the elections are fraudulent, whatever the case may be, there are different ways that things can go wrong. And obviously, you can have a democracy with a military coup in calling a despotism, installing a despotism or installing some other form of government. These things are another way to look at this, the boundaries between these things are in some sense non-existent because you can have overlapping forms of government. In fact, pretty often that's what happens. But another way to look at this is that you were talking about you were framing it in terms of what's morally right or what's legitimate.
Because I'm fascinated by that question.
Well, but I'm surprised to hear that coming from you.
Because our society has, we attach right, wrong, ethics, morality, and all those things to those things. And
I usually come at it from that direction. You usually come at it from the opposite
difficult
direction.
To do it. So go for it.
Sorry, I don't know what's up.
No, it becomes difficult to do it when you are, like, your society has certain ideas that are subjective. And so it's trying to, it wrestles with these moral ideas. And to me, in my head, it's not an issue of right or wrong. Those things don't exist. What is more true is action and consequence of what happens and playing that stuff out in the sense of this is the outcome. But I still like to grapple with the notion of right, wrong, ethics, and morality. That's why I'm dragging you into that kind of framework.
Totally.
To let you work that out.
Well, there are different levels of operation here. So, I mean, if you're dealing with it on the level of pure power, if you're dealing with it as somebody who's trying to grip the power, the powers attributed and given to the state, exercised by the state, by any state, that's an extreme level of power. So whether you're, somebody ideologically driven or somebody driven purely by personal interest, whether you're a military coup person or a fraudulent leader of a country, driven by electoral fraud or whatever the case may be. I mean, there's going to be this sort of high level, pure dialectic, pure dynamic, the pure mechanics of power, where you're having to face off with other people purely on terms of what you can bring to the battle. I think the moral thing comes when you look at it. It's not just it's both publicly, both from the popular view, from the view of with this idea of democracy, with this idea that government should be representative, that ultimately it should be the people who are the ultimate frame of reference for what's right. I think that's where that comes in. And then, then there might be this conversation about whether people in general or certain groups of people, certain leaders should cultivate this view, this ethical view of looking at things, whether it's good for the nature of the culture of that leadership. In other words, if you focus purely on realpolitik, if you focus purely on what's practical or pragmatic, that maybe you lose sight of something culturally and intuitively that's incredibly important over multiple generations.
Shane, you're dodging my question,
for
buddy.
Your culture.
You're dodging my question.
Well, go back to it. I'm
All
responding to it in broad terms. So
Evo Morales gets pulled out of his seat with a military coup. You have multiple places in South America that were being taken out in military coups. Whether you want to say Guatemala, whether you want to say Chile. These were people who were democratically elected that the public wanted. This was their guy. And we helped foment coups in those countries because for various reasons. In some cases, we got this kind of spirit of communism of sorts. These guys are just Democrats. Or in other cases, you had the bananas. You get the banana republics. They wanted territory for United Fruit. But basically, these governments were taken out. Now, Evo Morales being one of the most recent ones, he made the point of saying, look, I don't want a civil war on my watch. Meaning, I understand these fascists are taking over. I understand I won this election by 10 points, something that we would never see in the United States anytime soon. And I understand that, but it is more important for me to try to save life. And so I'm going to leave and go to Mexico. Now, it's going to be a civil war anyway. And my point is it right for a democratic government to abdicate basically the throne when it's under threat, especially when it's democratically elected and there is nothing to hold back the night at the point where the fascists smash the system and it's coming something else? Meaning all of these people's lives are at risk. Like, what's the ethical or the moral or even the basically right choice to do in a situation like that? Is it to, I'm going to abdicate in order to prevent bloodshed? Or is it to engage and say, no, I am the democratically elected person here and I'm going to stand ground in order to hold this, even if it takes 20,000 lives to do it?
I mean, that's kind of a tough one, but maybe it's because I don't have a moral frame on that one. I'm not living in a country where I'm seeing somebody do that, and so I don't have any sentiment in response to that. But even if I did, my sentiment would be in response to what side of that dispute I'm on. If I were in favor of that government, you know, you're setting it up in terms of a democratically elected government that is being displaced by a military coup.
Wildly elected. Wildly elected, so it wasn't even close.
That's the thing. Yeah. No, I hear you. And then chooses to sort of abdicate power when pressed for it, and whether that's right to do, whether we should accept that. I don't know, man. I mean, that's tricky. That's a little bit of a tricky thing to handle, just because, again, I don't have a frame of reference for it. You can look at it from any number of perspectives. You can look at it from the democratically elected leader's perspective, who's thinking simultaneously, hey, I don't want to just leave. I don't want to be a government in exile effectively, or leave my government. But I also want to maintain some semblance of power. I don't want to go to prison. You know, if there's potential for getting executed, if the idea is that you're going into exile or asylum for your safety, whatever way you're looking at it, then there's this sense of should you maintain your, you know, whatever stake in power you have, so that your constituents can back you up at a later date to take back over. You see what I'm saying? There are aspects of the moral dynamic that I can draw out. Like, we can talk about that stuff, but I just don't have a perspective on it because I'm not in it. Another way to look at this stuff is, I think it's actually kind of difficult for us, unless we have experience, to imagine ourselves doing things morally. These toy moral scenarios that we throw out, I think it's mostly instructive when people have been through it and they're using those as metaphors to teach other people about things they've experienced. But if we're just using it for ourselves, how would I feel if I were in this scenario? You might learn something about where you are now, but I don't think you'd really learn where you would be in that situation.
It's just
I guess, what are you trying to learn from it, though?
No, it's just a thought experiment. I get fascinated by these moral quandaries. Like, because to me, it's not morality. Morality has nothing to do with it. To me, ethics has literally nothing to do with it. Like, if you were in a war, let's say the United States was in a war with another country, all of these ideas that you may consider ethical and ideas around war and everything else will go to pot the moment that those countries get that much more engaged and it gets that much more desperate. It's not real. And so basically you're stuck with situations of people who have to make choices that are gut-wrenching because there are no good choices. It's like, I do A, 10,000 people die. I do B, 15,000 people die. And what am I going to do in this position? So, you know, if you're looking back at World War II, for example, there were times where the Brits had to basically, not acknowledge that they knew and had broken the codes, and they knew a place was going to get bombed. But if you alert them, people are going to die. If I don't alert them, people definitely are going to die. And we don't want them to basically break the spot. Like, these are choices that people have to kind of make. If you're listening, or if you're reading some of the historical books, like on those wars and some of the autobiographies, it's heart-wrenching. And you try to think to yourself, how do you operate in a framework like that? And fact of the matter is, you operate to the best of your ability in a framework like that. And your notion of morality and ethics, those things come to pass when you get an environment that allows you to have those things. That it's not absolutes. It's one of those things where if you're in that position, there is no right answer. That basically the only answer you have is a cause and effect answer. If I abdicate, how many people are going to die? If I stay, how many people are going to die? Do I want that on my conscience? Can I deal with that as a leader? Can I put that much blood on my hands in trying to do that? And some people may say, yeah, no. It is literally better for that society to go through kind of a reemergence of what I was trying to do, as opposed to me bloodily fighting through it.
One quick take here, Jamarl.
Yeah.
One quick take.
Go for it.
Ethics may be evidence. So our ethical sentiments may be
it just
evidence.
Doesn't apply.
Well, no, but here's what I'm saying. It may be evidence because what are our ethics if not evolution at work? Our ethics are these sort of sentimental responses that get us out of bad situations and into good ones by default. That's why they're incentivized to exist, and therefore, you don't know exactly what it's evidence for. You don't know how strongly you should take it, and that's why emotions aren't a pure guide. But ethical sentiments, I think, if you look at them, can teach you very real, important truths about pure cause and effect relationships in our world. That's my take. We can come back to it maybe. We're going into a break. We're having problems with our phones, so we're going to be trying to bring Yakov Shapiro, our next guest, on, but we'll see. This may take a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be right back.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Tune in to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the latest news, commentary, and political analysis. What's really behind the political and social crisis gripping the United States and the world? If you're tired of a superficial and shallow reporting from the mainstream media, here's your alternative. Forget the spoon-fed sound bites from pundits who know so little about so much. We deal with real issues. War in the Middle East, the military-industrial complex, U.S.-Russian relations, the rise of China, austerity, mass migration, global warming, and social justice movements in the United States and around the world, and much more. We bring you independent experts, analysts, and activists. Learn what really makes the decision makers take from the boardroom of Wall Street to the West Wing of the White House. Here is where the people fighting for chance speak and are heard loud and clear. 5 days a week on Radio Sputnik and SputnikNews.com.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most
Yakov
of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig right into the details.
Yakov, are you on?
Fault Lines.
And we are back, coming to you live from across the divided states of America. It's Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and I think we may actually have him on. Do we have Rabbi Yakov Shapiro on, Saul?
We have, but he's having trouble hearing us, so let me try getting
okay, so we have him on, but we're working out brief technical difficulties. Yeah, weird problems with the phones. I don't know what's going on. By the way, we're going to be talking about Zionism with Rabbi Yakov Shapiro, author of the book The Empty Wagon, a rabbi and a long-term writer on the relationship between Zionism and Judaism. Just an interesting conversation. Definitely in part triggered. I mean, Israel's kind of constantly a big international topic because, of course, the Middle East is a constant hotspot, and Israel tends to have its hands in things, and it's just constantly there's this state of tension that hasn't really ceased or apparently slowed down. It's just kind of oscillated for decades, as far as I can tell, going back to, again, the 60s in the case of Israel at the very latest. Anyway, still trying to bring him on. Yeah, Jamarl, fascinating conversation last segment. We kind of took it in our own little direction, like we do sometimes if we're not getting calls and we're just having our own little thing. But interesting topic.
Well, my wife hates those conversations. She's like, I don't want to get to the center of everything. Like, let's say, for example, we're watching Vampire Diaries, and it's teeny bopper. You're just kind of checked out of that process, and she's just sitting there doing with her phone or whatever. And one of the episodes had this guy that was basically the devil, right? But basically their understanding of this was he used a psychic imprint in order to create an entire dimension that he dragged people to. And I asked my wife, I was like, where does he get legitimacy to do that? And she said, what are you talking about? I said, that's just one guy that decided that he was going to do this. And he created basically hell and decide on his own which souls to drag to that dimension. And she's like, well, I mean, I don't know if he has a legitimacy to it. I said, well, the legitimacy was made just by having the power to do it. That's the way international relations work with countries. And her thing was like, okay, well, whatever. And then I said, well, wait a minute. What does that mean about life itself? And she says, what are you talking about? I said, if it's a mental imprint that was able to create a dimension that these people are experiencing as physicality, what does it mean about the dimension to which they're already existing on? And at that point, she's checked out. And in her head, it's like, dude, I just want to watch TV. And to me, I get enamored by what it means. Like, it's not enough to just experience. It's also like, what does it mean for this to be true? Because I think anytime that you're watching some kind of art, some kind of movie, they are expressing something that they're trying to, pull from some aspect of the environment. They're not pulling something from something that they never had experience with or they couldn't get to the next block over. And I do think when we're analyzing just where we are in this physicality, this is weird. The explanation that you've been given is that matter formed one magic trick. And then when it formed, all of these mechanical things took place. But eventually, something that was completely dead and inert developed the ability to comprehend the world itself. And they said it was just by accident and coincidence. And
Hello.
Yeah. It's like, right. Right. It's like, all right.
Shapiro.
You have him on.
Oh, he's back.
You have
Excellent.
Dr.
Good,
Rabbi
we're going
Shapiro with us.
into nowhere. Jakob Shapiro, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm sorry we were having problems with the phones and everything else. But Rabbi Jakob Shapiro, author, The Empty Wagon, Zionism and Judaism. So one of the questions that I think people get many times is the difference between Zionism and Judaism. And oftentimes there's this push to try to make these things as if they were intrinsically linked. But they're not entirely intrinsically linked, are they? Could you give an explanation?
They're entirely not linked. Judaism is a religion. The Jewish people were always a religious collective community, kind of like Christians in a way. Then came the Zionists. They didn't like being Jews. They didn't like the Jews. Herzl, Jabotinsky, these guys said the reason why the anti-Semites hate the Jews is because the Jews are disgusting, and in fact the anti-Semites are right about them. So first they tried these type of Jews assimilation. They tried assimilation. But then the anti-Semites persecuted the non-religious, non-Jewish type Jews as well. That started in Russia, 1881. Plan B was Jewish nationalism. Let's change the Jewish people so that they won't be so hateable anymore. Let's make them into a normal nation. In those days, the 19th century, nationalism was sweeping across Europe, and it made people into proud, strong nations. And the Zionists figured that if we do the same thing to the Jews, anti-Semitism will end. Leo Pinsker and Theodor Herzl wrote clearly. Herzl wrote it on the last page of his book, The Jewish State. It's the climax of his book, that once Zionism gets off the ground, anti-Semitism will end. So they decided to rebrand the Jews. Instead of a religion, we're a nationality. Nationality, the problem is that the Jews had no national characteristics. We had no common land, language, or culture. The Jews did not speak Hebrew. And they actually purposely did not speak Hebrew because Hebrew was a holy language. By way of analogy, kind of like it would be like Christians speaking Latin, right? But Hebrew was a holy language, which makes it different than Latin to the Christians, but it's the same idea. It's the language of our texts, our prayers, and our religious communication. But our street, the way we spoke in the street, for thousands of years, Jews spoke various languages, and there was no reason to speak Hebrew. Aramaic, the Jews spoke in the last Jewish Commonwealth. But the Zionists knew that common language, land, and culture are the three main characteristics of a nationality. At that point in time when Zionism began, the late 1800s, early 1900s, the Jews had none of those things. So the first thing they did was a man by the name of Ben Yehuda decided to create a language called Modern Hebrew. Now, not only was Modern Hebrew designed to be a national language of the Jewish people, and Hebrew was never their national language. They did speak Hebrew in biblical times, but that is not what made us into a people. Only the religion did. We didn't need to speak Hebrew to be a people, and nor did it contribute to our peoplehood. But in modern nationalism, language does. So they invented this language, Modern Hebrew, in order to give us national characteristics. And they tried to make a Jewish culture. They called it tarbut. There's no such thing as Jewish culture. We have what we consider in America Jewish culture is really Ashkenazi Jewish culture. But there is Oriental Jews, there's Yemenite Jews, Moroccan Jews, Ethiopian Jews. And they have a much different cult. They have nothing in common culturally with the German Jews or the Russian Jews. Yeah, there's no such thing as a Jewish culture. But they decided to make one. And they decided to try to re-engineer the Jewish people. Now, part of the re-engineering was an ideology. For 100 years, they were banging into the head of the Jews. We are a nationality. We are a nationality. We just need a land. We just need a country. And they went about creating Zionism. But the Jewish people, the traditional Jewish people, and even today, the Orthodox, except for the two groups, what we call modern Orthodox and the national religious, the settlers, mostly in Israel, they believe the Zionist teaching that the Jews are a nationality. Now, mind you, none of these original Zionists were religious. They were actually anti-religious. Herzl celebrated Christmas, and he did not celebrate any Jewish holidays. He did not circumcise his children. He did not like Judaism at all. Jabotinsky said the only Judaism is to learn how to shoot. He said actually a Zionist is, well, today's Judaism is to learn how to shoot. He said a Zionist personality is the exact opposite of the Zhid. The Zhid was a Russian derogatory term for Jew, kind of like kike. He said a Zionist is the opposite of a kike. Take every personality trait that a kike has, a Zhid in his language, and imagine its diametric opposite. That's what the Hebrew, meaning the Zionist, is going to be. Ben Gurion said that Orthodox Judaism, the idea that traditional Judaism doesn't change, doesn't evolve, is Nazi ideology. That's what he said about Orthodox Judaism. He said clearly he does not believe in the God of the Bible. Yet, of course, he said the Bible promised the Jews the land. That everybody knows was everybody mocks Ben Gurion for that. These people wanted to destroy Judaism and recreate Zionism. The thing is, it didn't work because Zionists really didn't see why it was worth being a Zionist. They may as well just be, regular Germans or Russians or what have you. So there was a rabbi, his name was Abraham Cook, that falsely portrayed nationalism as a form of Judaism. The settlers are the students of his students. To them, there is no difference between the religious and the political. To most Orthodox Jews, and once upon a time to all Jews, even the Reform Jews, Judaism is a religion, and it has nothing to do with a nationality. Zionism is nationalism. In traditional Judaism, Zionism, nationalism is considered idol worship because it's changing the very definition and identity of a Jew. That's it.
You guys are listening to Rabbi Jacob Shapiro, author of The Empty Wagon, Zionism and Judaism. Let's come back because I really want to engage this. I am fascinated by this conversation, which is why I just pretty much let you talk. But we'll be back in a moment. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for a regular segment called Criminal Injustice about the most egregious conduct of our courts and how justice is denied to so many people in this country. Tune in to Loud and Clear this Thursday and every Thursday for thorough and independent analysis of our criminal injustice system.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Shane Stranahan. We're joined by Yaakov Shapiro, Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, author of The Empty Wagon, Zionism and Judaism. Let me ask you this. From my vantage point, when I look out at the world, and I try to find ways of identifying with various places, some you can identify with more than others. As an African American, I see a certain identification, or I have, whether it's entirely apt or not, or whether there are contours in it that don't entirely apply, with what African Americans went through in the United States, with a similarity of what is taking place in regards to how Palestinians are being criminalized and treated basically as second-class citizens in an open-air ghetto. How did this start? Now, I know about the Balfour document, but I'm talking more so after World War II, when the number of Jews who starts coming into the Palestinian territories kicks up. What are the mechanics of that? And what does it look like from the standpoint of being on the ground if you were living there in that situation when those numbers started to pour in?
Okay, so I'll gladly answer, but first I have to preface a disclaimer. The state of Israel has as much to me as the state of China or Bulgaria or Russia does. I'm an American Jew. I have nothing to do with any foreign countries. My family was from Poland and England. The state of Israel, which was created in 1948, has no more to do with me than it does with any other citizen of this country. And I'm answering as an American citizen because as a Jew, there is no connection between me and that country. But I do know something about Zionism, and the answer to your question is this. When Zionism started, there was a question what to do about the non-Jewish Arabs living there. And there was a disagreement between two segments of Zionism, the left and the right. The left, represented by Ben-Gurion, which today you would call, let's say, the Labor Party and those types, said, look, the Arabs are going to be very appreciative of us because once we take over the land, we will advance it, we will develop it, and they'll benefit as well. The right-wing Zionists, represented by Jabotinsky, today it would be the Likud. Benjamin Netanyahu considers himself a student of Jabotinsky. That's a quote of his. Wrote in an essay called The Iron Wall that Ben-Gurion's position is a fantasy. He said, no people in the history of the world, from the Indians to anybody else that was colonized, those are his words, ever welcomed the colonizers, regardless of whether they treated them well or unwell. And therefore, the only way that the Jews are going to, the Zionists actually, they refer to them as the Jews, are going to succeed in making this land, that land in the, he said, Jewish state, is by force of arms and bayonets. That's what he said. And what happened was, the Mufti then told, there was an American journalist, he was then the head of Harvard College, which later became Harvard University, that he has nothing against the Jews moving into Palestine, nothing at all, as long as they don't take it over and make it into their country. However, in order to do it, they knew, and at the end Ben-Gurion agreed, the only way to do it would be to make sure that the land maintains a Jewish majority and majority rules. They had experienced what they call a demographic problem. The demographic problem is that the birth rate of the Zionists in Israel is less per capita than the birth rate of the non-Jewish people. And after 1967, when large swaths of territory were conquered by Israel, now they had a much bigger demographic problem. So now they're faced with a dilemma: how to maintain Israel as a Jewish state or the Jewish state, and at the same time deal with a looming possibility of a majority of non-Jewish people. So this is why they do what they do. Now, a year ago, 2 years ago, I think it was, approximately, they made a new law. Now, Israel has no constitution. They had a Declaration of Independence, but there was no constitution. The reason they didn't make a constitution is because it's very hard to make a Jewish state and a democratic state and actually make a constitution to that effect. So they have no constitution. Instead, they have what they call basic laws, which is kind of like what we would call a constitutional level of law, kind of. So they made a basic law a year or so ago that said that even though Israel's a democracy, officially on paper, it is only the nation state of the Jewish people all over the world, meaning only Jews have a right to national self-determination in Israel. In other words, every country in the world, certainly every democratic country, and I think every country, period, is the state of its citizens. Even, let's say, Muslim countries, Saudi Arabia is the state of the Saudi Arabians. Israel is not the state of its citizens in the national sense. It's the state of all the Jewish people, be they citizens or not citizens. That's what they claim by law. Now, of course, this law covers millions of people outside of Israel over which the law has no jurisdiction. I'm one of them, and it's a unilateral claim of the Zionists that they are the state of the Jewish people. And the bottom line answer to your question is this. The question is Israel the state of its citizens or the state of the Jews? And the question of whether it's my state, whether it's connected to me as a Jew in America, and whether it's connected to the Palestinians as their state, is the exact same question, because it's either the state of the Jews or the state of its citizens. It's one of the two. So I always say, you know, when you make somebody swear to tell the truth, he has to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, right? So a country of its citizens has to be a country of its citizens, all its citizens, and nobody but its citizens. The Palestinian issue, the Palestinian political issue, it's not a religious issue, it had nothing to do with Jews per se, it's Israel and Palestinians. A political issue is the question whether Israel is the state of all its citizens. My issue is the question is Israel the state of nobody but its citizens? The only difference is Israel has no control over me.
How does this get resolved?
Thank you again for being with us.
Oh, thank
Rabbi
you, Shane. Go for it.
Yeah, just a quick question here, Shapiro, Rabbi Shapiro. Isn't there something inimical at the core of Judaism to this idea of founding a political state? I believe that in the older incarnation of the show, you might have talked about this, but I certainly remember talking about it with Lee, who had learned it from you, I believe. But isn't there something? I mean, and it makes sense if you look at the sort of modern cultural perspective of Jews as a group that has continuously since their origin been pushed out. And so as a religion has developed in some sense in response to that, as far as I can tell, isn't there something at the core of Judaism that's being rejected by Zionist attempts at founding a nation state for Jews?
Yes, two things. Thing number one is that according to Jewish law, the Jews are not allowed to have a state. We're supposed to be living all over the world and citizens of the world. When the Messiah comes...
I want to hold you up. I'm sorry for interrupting very quickly, but I just want to stop you right there and sort of emphasize that. You're saying that according to Jewish law, Jewish people should not have a state. Isn't that the most fundamental contradiction you can possibly have between Zionist, ambitions or aspirations and, the core of Judaism?
Well, it's the second most contradictory thing. The first is that before the state of Israel, there was Zionism also, right? There were actually Zionists founding fathers of Zionism, like Achad Ha'am, that said we don't necessarily need a state. We'll have a cultural center. There are Zionists today that have recently expressed that idea. It is a contradiction to Judaism, but it's not the most fundamental one. The most fundamental contradiction between Zionism and Judaism is that Zionism believes or claims that the Jewish people are a nationality like the French and the British and the Kurds. Judaism says, no, a Jew is a job description, given a job by God on Mount Sinai, as the Bible says, to fulfill the commandments. End of story. The transformation of the religious into the political is the biggest blasphemy that Zionism has created, and that was even before a state or without a state. The fact that they created a state, not for Jews, you said for Jews, it's worse than that. It's a state of the Jews, meaning, as Netanyahu writes in his book, as Yair Lapid has said, as the Zionists constantly reiterate, Israel is to the Jews what Japan is to the Japanese, meaning it is the cradle of Jewish identity. It's more than just a state for Jews. That's what they sometimes want you to believe. But they claim that it's part and parcel of Jewish identity. That's actually identity theft against the Jew, not merely a violation of Jewish law. I mean, look, Netanyahu violates Jewish law every week, every day. All these Zionists that aren't observant violate Jewish law every day. They don't care about Jewish law. They don't eat kosher food. They don't keep the Sabbath, the basic Jewish law. They don't even believe in the Jewish religion. So forget about that. That's one level. But another level, it's one thing if a person doesn't want to observe the laws. Fine. It's a sin, but whatever. That's his choice. There's another thing if you claim that you represent all the Jews in the world and you are the state of all the Jews and all the identity of all Jews, including me, people who do want to observe the Jewish law. No, your identity is you are a national of our state. That's worse. So there are two problems. Zionism is an attack on Judaism. And the state of Israel is a violation of Jewish law.
How is this? So this is it makes sense as you're explaining it. Actually, we only have a few minutes left. I want to get into a broader question, but real quick, I want to draw up a source. Where is it? If I want to learn more, of course, I can buy your book. I can read The Empty Wagon. But specifically, if I want to figure out where in Judaism the sort of historical authority comes in for this idea that the Jews should not have a state, if I want to understand the reasoning behind that, if I want to get a sense, doing some of my reading,
you need to read my book. Unless you read Aramaic, where the original sources are in the Talmud, you would want to read my book. In English,
okay, fair enough.
That's humbly, that's the best thing I could recommend to you.
Okay. If that's what I'll do, then I'll do that. All right. Now, again, in our last couple of minutes, we're joined by Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro talking about Zionism and Judaism. You know what? I'll put it like this: you know so much more about this that we've only had you on a few times, but whenever we do, of course, you immediately go into the great depths of your knowledge to reveal to us things we don't know, and we sort of sit here patiently. And ideally, as we get you back on, we can go deeper into this stuff. It's very interesting to learn about, especially because of not just how heavily it weighs on modern politics internationally, with the United States as Israel's main international ally. No hedging there. As Israel's main international connection, and with them as one of ours. It weighs heavily on that, but also just on this deeper level of the religion itself, and even philosophically to think about. It's a very interesting problem.
I do want to make one point. One of the reasons that I love having you on, like Shane said, I just sit here and listen to you. I mean, part of it I know, a lot of it I don't. Is this kind of poor description that takes place in our media, where it's a religious issue, and it's not a religious issue; it's a political issue. It's an issue about land, and as long as that's missed, people think it's intractable. So I really appreciate you coming on, making that point that much more plain, that much more clear in your descriptions and understanding of how these things have taken place.
Thank you. It's absolutely true. And the reason why they describe it as religious is because they want it to be intractable. They want it to have no solution, or they want to make excuses why not to try solutions. So they say it's a religious war.
That's the problem with it, is that it becomes it so sort of broadens the scope of debate about what could be just a political problem. I think especially we've learned to develop some strong hesitancy about dividing along religious lines. Political lines are a lot more sanct. And so I just worry that this would cause further problems. I worry that it already is. Anyway, we've got to go. Thank you for joining us, Rabbi Shapiro.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Really appreciate it. He's the author of The Empty Wagon, Zionism's Journey from Identity Crisis to Identity Theft. We will be back in a minute. You've been listening to Jamarl Thomas, Shane Stranahan, Fault Lines. We'll be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
And we're back live from the divided states of America. I'm on the West Coast, Jamarl's on the East Coast. We are coming to you. We are the most disruptive show in American politics. And in the politically independent corner, just so you know whose voice you're listening to, I am Shane Stranahan, investigative political analyst.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
Together, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And it is official. Last night, the second night of the Democratic National Convention, delegates from all 57 states and territories cast ballots to nominate former Vice President Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee for president in 2020. At 10:05 p.m., the votes from the great state of North Carolina clinched the nomination with a total of 2,374. Biden officially received 83 from the state, with Sanders taking 39. Overall, Biden finished with 3,558 votes, while Sanders ended up with 1,151. Speeches came from his wife, Biden's wife and educator, Jill Biden. Former presidents Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter also spoke. So did Carolyn Kennedy and former secretaries of state Colin Powell and John Kerry. They all spoke out in favor of Joe Biden. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez also spoke briefly, less than 2 minutes. She used her speaking slot to nominate Bernie Sanders. Again, like I was saying, Biden going up against Bernie Sanders. This, as far as all of us can tell, purely symbolic. Sanders has dropped out of the running at the latest in 2020, maybe as early as 2016. Anyway, tonight, Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, they're going to be speaking. The DNC, the convention, will be going until Thursday. In our next headline, the United States Postmaster General Louis DeJoy will suspend new budget cuts until after the election. New budget cuts for the USPS. He said that the postal system is equipped to handle the election. This, of course, comes after intense scrutiny, I'll just put it that way, of Louis DeJoy, of his past, of his involvements, his history, but specifically about what he's been doing to the USPS with services slowed down, overtime hours not getting paid, new routes getting canceled, new delivery routes getting canceled, and mailboxes being retrieved from the streets. It is apparently madness across the United States, with some medical deliveries taking several weeks longer than they otherwise would have, than they historically had. I've heard about this. I'll just say we sometimes take longer in these headlines at 8 and 9 a.m. I have a family member who's like been waiting on stuff, and she's saying that it's taken long. I'm not even going to say which relation. She's saying it's taken longer to get to her than she ever has before. So everybody's seeing it, even trivial gardening stuff. Anyway, in our next headlines, Senate Intel Committee yesterday released its final report on Russiagate, on the 2016 accusations of Trump's collusion with Russia. I'm going to point out that they sort of singled out, in reporting on this, but also in the document itself, they singled out Paul Manafort. It seems like they thought their strongest case could be made with the Paul Manafort connection. This is interesting, though, because they're criticizing Paul Manafort. They're saying, even though Paul Manafort, when he was advising Yanukovych in Ukraine, even though he was advising Yanukovych to go closer to the U.S., further away from Russia, they're saying into, suggesting that Trump look into Ukrainians and the DNC working together, Ukrainian officials and the DNC, the Democrats basically working together against Trump, something they did in the 2016 election cycle. So Manafort was recommending that Trump look into this. This, of course, became the center of the actual impeachment, the thing that the Democrats used to try to take Trump out legally. The center of the impeachment was Ukraine. Again, it's frustrating because from as far as I can tell, Manafort was suggesting that Trump look into something that he really should look into. And as far as I can tell, Manafort didn't do anything wrong when it comes to Ukraine. I'm not saying anything about him as a person, as a gold standard or anything like that. But with Ukraine, I don't see serious stuff there. The black ledger that, people were throwing at him was fake. Anyway, that's apparently not how history is going to remember him, at least circa 2020. After, again, the Senate Intel Committee released its final report on 2016 on Russiagate, damning Manafort, damning Natalia Veselnitskaya, damning some of these slightly more marginal players who are being thrown under the bus to try to offer some friction to the Trump administration, I guess, to try to slow things down. Anyway, that's me. That's my little biased take. Let's move on. In the headlines, stocks have risen to wipe out the coronavirus slump, making that the shortest bear market in history the last couple of months. Again, shortest bear market in history, at least according to the nominal values of our economy. Again, we're talking about how Wall Street appears to have been floating just fine, while Main Street appears to continue to suffer. We were talking with Marshall Auerbach yesterday about how, the rich with their current wealth might just be throwing it into the market. Congress may have just set it up so that the already wealthy can continue to sort of make money on their money, while the rest of us are left to suffer. Anyway, we'll see if that actually pans out. We'll see how the market's doing a couple of months, a year from now. In our next headline, Australia's Prime Minister says his country should make a coronavirus vaccine, quote, as mandatory as you can possibly make it, end quote. This is controversial, adding that there are always exemptions for any vaccine on medical grounds, but that should be on the only basis, end quote. Again, medical grounds should be the only basis for refusing a vaccine. I hesitate to inject people with things on a national basis without their permission. I just don't see that ending well on this sort of larger human level. In our next headline, the Mortgage Bankers Association says that a record number of home loans backed by the Federal Housing Association, 16% of them specifically, are now delinquent. That is signaling the effects of the pandemic on homeowners and on the economy. In our next headline, the president and the prime minister of Mali resigned and were taken to a military camp near the capital of Bamako, capital of Mali, following a military coup yesterday. That's a move that has been harshly criticized by international observers. In a televised address, President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta said he wanted, quote, no blood spilled, end quote, to keep him in power. So he is effectively passing over the baton from inside the jail cell. A spokesperson for the soldiers is calling for a, quote, civil political transition leading to credible general elections, end quote. These events follow months of protests over corruption, over the elections, the state of the elections, and over economic mismanagement in the country. Belarusian opposition candidate Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has made a direct call in English, in the English language, to EU leaders from Lithuania. She's asking for their assistance in her fight with Alexander Lukashenko, longtime leader in Belarus. And she has formed a 35-person council reportedly to administer a transfer of power from Lukashenko to her, or well, whoever, I suppose, if they're going to redo the election. We'll see what that actually looks like if she can do that. Again, maybe we can come back to this. I don't want to tarry too long in the headlines. Last story, last but not least here, chocolate snow has fallen on a Swiss town. I say that again, chocolate snow fell. The Lindt and Sprüngli company confirmed local reports on Tuesday that there was a minor defect in the cooling ventilation for a line for roasted cocoa nibs. Delicious. In its factory in Olten between Zurich and Basel. Combined with strong winds on Friday morning, the powder spread around the immediate vicinity of the factory. It left there a fine cocoa dusting, so delicious, so supreme. One car was lightly coated and the particles were reportedly completely harmless, but again, delicious. And with that, you're all caught up. That's the news. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're back into it, and we're taking calls, although, you know what? I don't know that we should do it, actually. Our phone calls came, they went. I mean, our lines came, they went. We're taking calls last hour, and then at about 8, I think it was like 8:17, they just stopped working. and then they started working. I mean, we got Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. Granted, that wasn't actually by phone. Apparently, they were working. Now they're not working again. Anyway, I'm in a state of absolute confusion, and I've got to tell you, folks, even though I just said you should call in, now I'm looking at the thing that we use, and apparently maybe you shouldn't. Apparently, maybe the lines are still shut down. So Jamarl and I are stuck here in this room, halfway across the country, talking with each other, with no hope of reprieve, no outside contact. We are marooned on this desert island. Jamarl, how does it feel to be here?
It's okay. Hey, I'm perfectly fine being marooned on this desert island. I have an area that I want to go into. As you were talking, I felt myself getting more annoyed. And when I feel myself getting more annoyed, it becomes that much easier to just kind of make a point. Let me get a chat first. Wesley Walker, some of us were really trying to get you to see this side, of this side of Bernie months ago. I was trying to pull you to Tulsi, but she endorsed Biden too. So, yes, unfortunately, Wesley Walker, she also endorsed Biden. Let me start here with this, Shane, and let me get how you perceive or take what I'm about to say. I get really annoyed sometimes with politics. In fact, that was the thing that actually got me into doing the channel. And, you would see stuff as you're reading history, and you think to yourself, why are they doing that? If my understanding and what I was taught growing up about the world and about politics was right, then that shouldn't happen. And it creates this weird crux of, okay, I need to understand this, which digs you into trying to figure out why things are the way they are. We have multiple policies right now. You have a chaos that is literally going out. Portland right now, still in flames. Astonishingly, for like 60-something days. And this is not a protest. At this point, it's just a riot with people who've gotten into their heads where you just want to fight cops and burn stuff. There's a difference in those things. You have a president that is working in tandem in some kind of way with a guy to slow down medications from going to people's houses. Real talk. A medication that you need, that your doctor said you're going to use, goes to your house, and the post office guy, because he doesn't want to deal with the election stuff, and he has companies that will contest with him, so he takes policy positions that are overt and over the top, that he's going to go and try to explain to you that they were perfectly rational, despite the fact that the Postal Service is indeed a service. It's a service. If it needs additional money, your state gives it additional money. It's not there to make a profit. It's not there to lose a ton of money. It's not there to be destroyed in the way that they're doing this. And they're doing this at the time where people need to vote. But that also affects other people in things. I have a grandmother that need medication. I have a mom. I get medication from the mail. And these things are affecting those items. And to make that and put a cherry on top, we get the Democratic Party right now rehashing Russiagate. Think of your world. Think of your world. Think of all the things that are on fire right now, that are going wrong, or all the people that are dying. Think of the people who they didn't even let speak at the political thing. And they, in their mind, say, Russiagate is it. I was sitting here reading the Russiagate stuff, talking about how, oh man, it got Donald Trump. It's damning this time around. And as you're reading it, they're bringing up Roger Stone. And they're bringing up people who had already been discredited. My point is, look, Roger Stone, in pursuit of what he was doing, lied. Roger Stone was prosecuted for lying. What was that lie? That he had a link between himself and WikiLeaks. The very fact that he was prosecuted indicates that there was no link. If a link existed, he would have never been prosecuted. For them to make the argument that Trump further claimed he had no recollection or specifics of any conversation with Mr. Stone between a certain part of dates, despite that, apparently they said we found a recollection between Trump and Stone, Trump lied. And it's like, lied about what? Roger Stone never had a connection to WikiLeaks. So Trump could talk to Roger Stone all day. It wouldn't matter one iota because there's no link. It's this stuff. It's insufferable. It's all sparkle and distraction. And it's like they're real things that are affecting all of us in some particular way. My wife maybe not doesn't feel well. She doesn't want to go to the doctor because of insurance. And you have this nonsense. And that's all it is. And it's political theater. Distraction, as opposed to dealing with real items that affect you and the people around you. It's aggravating to me.
It is, and much like, it's superficial, like you're saying, it's nonsense. I mean, and much like I'll put it like this: it's like glitter, and glitter spreads. You start using glitter, and pretty soon everything is covered in glitter, and pretty soon everything is superficial. If you start, it's the Gresham's law thing. If you bring in the bad money, suddenly the money starts to go bad. I think that's pretty much how it works when it comes to information. And
that's logical.
It's true. if you have a dysfunctional political system, another way of looking at this, if you have a dysfunctional, I'm going to go somewhere with this. If you have a dysfunctional political system,
it's logical with
mask
advantage. It's
What'd you
logical
say?
with advantage. It's logical with an advantage.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
meaning it makes a
it's
rational
short-run
action
thing.
at that point.
It's a short run thing.
Yeah.
We're by the way taking calls 202-521-1320. Apparently our lines are back up. We're going to go into a break in a second here. But there's a fundamental imperative. If your institutions are failing, if their growth is slowed, if they're used to growing, if they're used to doing well, and they suddenly stop, then you're going to have all this incentive to keep going, to keep the institution going, to keep the boats afloat, and to advertise everything you can that's positive about what's going on and to downplay the negative. The problem with that over time, of course, is that you sort of suppress the mechanisms by which you can identify what's going wrong in your systems and alleviate it. And that is our political system. That's exactly what we live in right now, where we're distracted from actually solving the problems, from identifying the problems and solving them. Instead, we're given this narrative that things are going more or less fine. Trump, as far as I can tell, is the first political figure to put any real cracks in that narrative, but it's really just being revealed by him. And we're still living and figuring out how to actually identify all that stuff and talk about it. But you're right, like you're saying, what we're given is superficial stuff, bread and circuses, with Russia and China as our enemies and chief distractions. I think that's at the end of the day, it's either Trump for the Democrats or the Democrats for Trump, and then Russia and China on the international level. And that's what we're stuck in. That's the game we're stuck in. Anyway, we're going to come back talking about it. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back and we're live. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We were due to be taking calls this segment, but apparently, like the yo-yo that it somehow on some level is, that our technical system has been reduced to this broken toy. We're not taking calls. Apparently, we're having trouble. This is by far the most problems we've had with our phone system.
I
don't know. It's
we're doing this remotely. The world is on fire, so things happen.
It is okay.
I do want to get. I want to get back to what you were saying. This thing of spectacle, this notion that at a certain point you have something real, at one point in history, at one point in time, and then something comes behind it that tries to distill the elements of the thing that's real into what they consider to be kind of what this thing is, but it's never really that thing again. And then you get an image of that thing, and after a while, the realness of it, the reason behind it, meaning the actual reason that particular ceremony was taking place, or the actual rationale that people were having that was infused them in that particular culture, that society, gets turned into just spectacle. And unfortunately, it's one thing when that's Christmas. It's another thing when that's your political system, or your economic system, or your judicial system. And you have all of these institutions that don't act in ways that you would expect them to act in a rational world. And by rational world, I only mean from the standpoint of human health, happiness, and life. Right now, at this very moment, you have all the technology in the world to ensure that everybody in this country and everybody in this world had food to eat, jobs that they could be doing, that they could give them some level of agency and everything else, and making the point that poverty is enforced. Scarcity is not something that we need. Scarcity is something that we enforce and allow some to have and others not. That's something we accept. And not just accept, it's something that we almost tacitly allow because there's nobody who has the job to deal with that. It's supposed to be Congress. Congress doesn't care. their interests are served by a upper 1%. The media doesn't care. Their interests are served by an upper 1%. And people wring their hands. Oh God, I can't believe we have all this crime and all these cops are beating people up. Like it doesn't seem that there is ever an internal analysis on the logic by which your society works and whether or not the logic that it works on is perpetuating outcomes like this. And in the environments that it allows people to exist in, those people come out in particular ways. I mean, even the imagination of individuals, like your ability to see what's possible for you, your ability to see what's possible for your society, the constraints that are put on even designating something as being right or wrong when it comes to basically a system to make sure that people can live and feed themselves. Meaning the point of your economic system or your point of your healthcare system, or for that matter, the point of your educational system, all of those things should have a point and a priority that you shoot for. And all of those things are now subordinate to cash. And so it's like these things degrade and there can never be an honest analysis of why, because ultimately the thing that may be making that degrade like that is off the table for discussion. Like
I don't think it's the pursuit of cash. I don't think it's a pursuit of cash.
What do you think it is? If you don't think it's pursuit of cash, what do you think it is?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a pursuit of cash. Again, that's the pursuit of power in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just how well that power is administered. It's how judiciously or wisely that power is used. The pursuit of power is inevitable to any material thing. That's because in some sense, physically, I mean, literally, if you look at the nature of the universe, it's just we're power consuming power. We're entropy consuming entropy. We're life.
Okay, that's fair.
in this universe. So on that deep level,
that's fair. I'm speaking of this in somewhat of a financial terms, but that's fair.
No,
that's
I'm going to go there. I'm just starting on that deep level. And the thing is that in our current system, with the invention of money, and it's something to remember, money was invented, we've come up with a way to liquidate, to abstract, and symbolize power, to symbolize the sort of social bonds of power that previously would have been ruled by violence and custom and interpersonal relationship and all that stuff. So money is the expression of that. When you have money, when money becomes the expression of that, increasingly it's a useful tool for that. And then we criticize our pursuit of power, our pursuit of money. But I mean, our government has been more and less functional under the pursuit of money. Like that's endemic through human history. That's literally thousands of years old. Capitalism, which is labeled as a new thing, is at its youngest, maybe 600 years old. Arguably, you can find it at earlier points in human history. This is just one of a number of forms. And arguably, it's just one end of a spectrum of human activity. That's how I see it, at least. Maybe that's the wrong way to see it. Maybe there's a paradigm shift. But
no.
Here's
That's fair. That's
see
totally
it.
fair.
It's not the pursuit of money or the pursuit of power that ruins things. It is how those things are pursued and why those things are pursued. The problem with pursuing either power or money is that they're abstractions. They don't exist. They don't lead to anything. They don't suggest anything. They have no wisdom inherent to them. They're just tools. And if all you're pursuing is the expansion of your tools, then it's sort of like it's cancer metastasizing. You are pursuing growth for no real reason, for no good end. And ultimately, it's up to the judicious use of those tools. Now, we live in a system that's been co-opted, that people are, again, there's rent seeking, there are these various institutions that could be run much better, but various entrenched parties have control of them. I would point that as the real problem. And sure, that looks like them pursuing cash because that's how that works. But we should just build better institutions. I don't think I have my criticisms of money as deeper criticisms than a lot of people, a lot of the takes we've even had for the far left takes on this show. I have my criticisms of that, but I don't think it's appropriate to make it ideological, which is what it fundamentally becomes, because it becomes about capitalism versus socialism. From me, that's just another circus. That's just another distraction.
No, I'm not taking it to capitalism, socialism. I'm trying to get to something a little bit deeper. It's not power in and of itself. Even the framing of mind that we have, either just in this country as we kick around, comes from somewhere. You're not a baby in a void. And you have people can come up with religious beliefs, almost like lines of code that have a certain way of operating when it's interacting with human beings. Meaning, I'm not in a vacuum. I have all sorts of things that are intersecting me. There are all sorts of things I need just to get from point A to point B. And in needing those things, what world am I born into? And are those things supplied to me? Am I able to get those things? And how am I going to have to behave in order to accustom myself to the incentives that are built into the system to which we're in? You can call it power, and that's fair. Let's just say this ability to get advantage and to dispense will over somebody else. And under normal circumstances, the only thing you have to do that is force. I can hit you in the head with this bone, and later it'll become a spaceship. But you have an overlay that has just taken place that basically people say, look, we'll agree to participate in this game space. Now, the catch becomes that the further you get into the game space, the less people actually agree. It becomes implicit. And it's not agreement anymore. It's indoctrination, where you need to behave in this particular way. Here's right, here's wrong, here's ethics, here's morality. And look, you might have some people who say socialism is good, bad. You might have capitalism good, bad. I hate those conversations because those conversations don't really mean anything. They're subjective. And somebody can say, I am okay with a hellscape, as long as I'm doing okay in that hellscape. And you can't say that person is wrong. You can say he's immoral based on your own rationality, all that stuff, but right, wrong, no. They have their choice. I'm making the basic point. So I'm not going to the capitalism, none of that stuff. I'm making the very basic point that we are taught in perpetuation about issues of power, control, things that we should shoot for and go for, things that are right and wrong. We're taught this stuff. This stuff is drilled into us. And you might have some people who can yank themselves out of it to some degree, but we still function under that notion. The overwhelming majority of the people who are going to be shoved through that are going to conform, with a few people on the side that don't. And to some degree, you have an indoctrinated society that makes it very difficult for the people of that society to have a different point of view, especially when all of their needs are baked into this particular system that doesn't supply everything their needs, and 80% of the world is just left for pot. Like, I hope you understand what I mean by this. This is not a capitalism, socialism, whatever argument. And maybe it is on some degree, but it's more so in the sense of what you as an individual is taught is right and wrong, and what you as an individual is taught that you should shoot for and strive for. And this goes beyond morality. This goes into a feedback mechanism that the more cash you make, the more access to things that you have, which gives you a certain incentive and a perspective of the world to go in that direction. And that's just true. Now, you can say that that's not good, bad, or anything else, and that's fair. You can say that that's not even money, that's an issue of power and control, or that money becomes a leash and an allegory for power. Fair enough. I'm just saying that it is there. And until we can somehow change people's minds to break this mindset, then it becomes difficult to get anything done and accomplished that is new and imaginative from where we are. And I think that's why
most
politics
people find it
becomes
reprehensible. I mean,
you think so? And yet here we are.
I think most people find the idea that politicians, or that anybody who's exercising power ostensibly on behalf of the public, on behalf of them, I think most people would find it, reprehensible that those people are aiming to make a bunch of money and to enrich their friends, while acting against the public's best interest. I think that idea is
Shane, that is our entire government. Literally,
exactly.
Our entire government.
I mean, of course, and that's the thing. So when I push back on you criticizing it, it's only because I don't want to fall back into the same old trap, because I don't see the solution as being either capitalistic or socialistic. I see the solution as being a lot more nuanced and complicated. And we'd have to talk specifics. Breaking news, though. We have a breaking news update here. The EU has said that it does not recognize Belarus's election results.
Wow! Are you serious?
Yes.
Oh,
so Tikhanovskaya, opposition
massive.
leader, now sort of in Lithuania, almost in asylum, after leaving Belarus a couple of days ago. And again, Lukashenko on very shaky footing here. This comes after the EU warned Moscow not to get involved again. Now we'll see what this is setting them up for. But
Wait, how can the European Union tell its ally to don't get involved? They're basically saying, look, we're going to take him out of that seat. Don't get involved in maintaining that position anymore. How can you say that? It's like what? I don't know, man. This stuff brings us to the brink of conflict. I understand that the Belarus election might have been stolen. Fair enough. I don't like the fact that the election was stolen. And I look at what was happening in South America and everything else. And oftentimes when those things are stolen, the weaker side in that is stuck with just being the weaker side.
We've had Mark Sloboda saying that he thinks that it was stolen, and that fits with a lot of the Western reception. And then we had Michael Maloof on yesterday saying that he thinks that it was not stolen, saying that he hasn't seen evidence of that. I mean, 80% is a pretty damn high number. That's a landslide if I ever saw one. 80% reportedly in favor, according to the official
I think it's
results
BS.
for Lukashenko.
Let me be honest. I
And
think
of
it's
course,
BS. I don't think he got 80%.
I mean,
what do you do about that?
One last thing here. Belarus as this legacy Soviet state, sort of last communist state in Eastern Europe, decades of the same leader. Oh, it's all so interesting, Jamarl. It's also interesting coming out of 2016, coming with this big push between nationalism and quote unquote globalism, whatever term you want to use to describe the opposite of nationalism on the international scale. It's so interesting to see this stuff happening in this small span of time. A lot to talk about. We'll be back in a minute. We're changing topics slightly, continuing on in that sort of same region, talking with Lucy Commissar about Bill Browder, Sergei Magnitsky, modern relevance, sanctions. We'll be back with her. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Every day we ask questions.
How is faith going to prevent suicides?
Well, do you see this as being a human rights violation?
Are the cows really stinking up the planet that much?
To move ideas forward.
A gravitational wave is a ripple in the fabric of space and time.
Hi, Lucy. This is Saul Aziz. I'm the engineer working today, Fault Lines.
Welcome to the show.
Wow, this is crazy. We're definitely talking sci-fi over here. From 20 years ago, people would never have believed this. Crazy times we're living in.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around this story. This is a fantastic story.
Yes, it is a fantastic story, and it's a worldwide problem.
Welcome to the party.
Fault lines.
And we're back and we're live. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Commissar. We're joined for this segment and the next by Lucy Commissar. She is an investigative journalist focusing on corporate and financial corruption. Lucy, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, thank you again for being with us. By the way, for those listening, you can follow Lucy on Twitter right now at Lucy Commissar, spelled LucyKomisar. You can also read her articles at the Commissar Scoop. So that's the Commissar again, KOMISAR Scoop, SCOOP.com, theCommissarScoop.com. Lucy, thanks again for being with us. We are, of course, talking about Bill Browder, Sergei Magnitsky, some of the history there. But I want to start off like this. We've had you on a number of times. This is one of our sort of perennial topics on this show. It has some new relevance. I want to get into some of the older relevance in terms of the dynamic between the United States, other Western countries, and Russia, going back to at the latest, the 90s. It's important to understand the history here in terms of how it set the conflict up, the sort of modern soft Cold War thing that we're in now, the new Cold War, it's sometimes being called. What the background there is between Russia and these other countries. So I think it's important from that perspective, but it also has there are a few other other ways that it's tying into a little bit more timely events currently going on. So I'll just bring up two. For one thing, in terms of its role in how sanctions are laid out, it's sanctions as a new sort of economic political cudgel that countries are using in these tit for tat back and forths. The Magnitsky Act and the Global Magnitsky Act, various acts passed in individual countries, seem to have the potential to become, and they're currently being used. They have been used by the UK, other countries, but they seem to have the potential to be used with some regularity as a tool going back and forth for different governments to sort of pinpoint sanctions against officials in other countries, effectively locking economies out of each other, locking some of the leading members of economies out of investing, owning assets in other countries. So it's interesting from this geopolitical perspective. I want to start with that. It's timely because these, more sanctions than ever these days, as far as I can tell. It's also timely because of Russiagate, and because in recent weeks, new connections have been laid out by Congress or being investigated by Congress. Some of the lines of investigation have to do with Strobe Talbot, the Brookings Institution, Jonathan Weiner, and this core of people not only connected to the Clintons, but also connected to Bill Browder, and connected to this whole narrative going back to to Russia preceding the 90s. Strobe Talbot, Clinton's longtime friend. Strobe Talbot was an expert on Russia, has been for decades, influencing policies in Washington, but a key person in the Clinton administration in the 90s when all this stuff was actually going down. So my point is, this is a kind of esoteric story, the Bill Browder, Sergei Magnitsky thing. And we keep bringing it back up, but it's interestingly relevant and central. It sort of seems like one of those undiscovered or hitherto unveiled, hitherto veiled, basically hitherto hidden sort of weird nexuses between these different realms of activity with some serious significance in the American state. So I'm going to start with that. We're going to go through some of the history here, talk about some of the more recent events, talk about Jonathan Weiner, talk about the interface between the State Department, between the U.S. government and Browder, Magnitsky, going back the history with the passage of the Magnitsky Act. Anyways, Lucy, let's just start there with my explanation. How would you start going from there? How did what I say sound? Did that make sense? Where would you fill in there? And where would you go in terms of laying out the narrative, laying out those connections?
Well, there's a very interesting connection between the Magnitsky Act and the trade issue in a way that most people don't know about. And it has to do with the history of the Magnitsky Act, and it's how it got passed. But so let me give you a little bit of the background. And it's very interesting because of the Democratic convention going on right now. I want to talk about the role of the Democrats and a few Republicans in getting it passed, and the curious developments of how something like this gets through. So first of all, for people that don't know, William Browder in the mid-1990s became manager of the Hermitage Fund, which was set up with $25 million from a Lebanese-Brazilian banker, Edmund Safra, and Israeli mining investor, Benny Steinmetz. That was in mid-90s. Then by 98, he was making some money, so he traded in his citizenship, his U.S. citizenship, for a UK passport, so he didn't have to pay taxes. The UK allows money that's made and parked offshore not to be taxed. But he didn't like paying Russian taxes either. And what happened was he decided he had his the shares that he was buying for himself and for clients. Initially Safra and Steinmetz, in shell companies set up in a place called Kalmykia, which is a Buddhist-dominated section, some hours from Moscow department, and they wanted to help people who had been disabled, many of them in the Afghanistan war, but otherwise disabled. They had
Lucy, I want to pause real quick for a second. One, to just sort of reset the story, but also to check in. You're saying that Kalmykia is Buddhist dominated. Kalmykia is a predominantly Buddhist region in Russia. Is that right?
I believe it was Buddhist dominated.
That's just very interesting. I think, I'll look into that more later. That's just filling in the story. That's just a very interesting piece of information. I just didn't know that. Anyway, we're talking about Bill Browder. Another quick note about Bill Browder. Grandfather Bill Browder. But no, go for it, Lucy.
They had tax write-offs. One, if you had 50% of your workers disabled, you had a huge tax write-off. And the second, you had a tax write-off if you used money to develop, to invest in the region. Well, he took the tax write-off, but he didn't do anything. His shell companies didn't have any employees. They were just shells to whole stock. And he didn't invest. He just moved money from one shell company to another. So in the early 2000s, they discovered that he had been cheating on, by then, with a couple of companies, 40 million in taxes. And they went after him on that. And there were judgments in 2004. He refused to pay. So in 2005, he was denied a Russian re-entry visa, which he protested about and saying it was, he didn't say it was because he didn't pay his taxes. In 2006, he moved all of his assets out of Russia. Now, his accountant was arrested in 2008 on this tax evasion. And the European Commission on Human Rights ruled last year that it was correct because of the evidence and because he was a flight risk. He was checking out flights from Moscow to London. So Browder's narrative, which was fake, is that Magnitsky was his lawyer. He wasn't. He was accountant. He was arrested because he blew the whistle on a scam by Russian officials to embezzle money from the Russian treasury. Then Magnitsky, who was in prison, died of heart failure, exaggerated by stomach disease, which the forensic reports say was not properly treated. There's no denial of that. However, Browder said, so he died in November of 2009. Browder first said in talks in Chatham House, London, and San Diego Law School in the next 2 years, he didn't know how Magnitsky died. After a few years, he invented a story that he'd been beaten to death. And here's where Jonathan Weiner comes in. He was a former assistant to John Kerry, Senator John Kerry, and then a State Department official. He was working for APCO, an international public relations company, one of whose major clients was Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Browder had a connection with Khodorkovsky because they were both involved in the Avisma company, which Browder and partners bought from Khodorkovsky, and they were running a transfer pricing scheme to cheat the Russians of taxes and minority investors of taxes. They were using a shell company in the Isle of Man to buy, so-called buy, the product of Avisma, which was titanium, for a very low price, which is what they would base the taxes and dividends on, and then they would sell it on the world market at the real price, and they would take the rake off. So Khodorkovsky started, and Browder continued it. So we know about that because of a lawsuit, because the guy that was running the scam, named Peter Bond in the Isle of Man, didn't want to give all the rake off. There's no honor among thieves. And so we got the documents where Browder basically says, yeah, this is what we were doing. So here is how the Democrats and Republicans colluded in this scam. So 4 months after the death, in March of 2010, Browder is plotting his Magnitsky hoax and attacking Russians he would claim were responsible for the death. Although he continued to say publicly, like in San Diego, he didn't know how he died. Browder got Maryland Democratic Senator Ben Cardin to send a letter to Hillary Clinton, then Secretary of State, in March 2010. So this is just 4 months after Magnitsky died, urging her to ban visas for 60 people Browder had listed, without evidence, as complicit in the death. And the letter was written by Browder acolyte Kyle Parker, a staffer at the House Foreign Affairs Committee, saying, I urge you to withdraw visa privileges of all those involved in the crime and their dependents and their family members immediately. No due process, not even for the children and grandparents. And attached to the list was the 60 officials. Now, they were being accused also of the tax refund fraud against the Treasury. That was a scheme in which shell companies were set up to sue Browder's Hermitage companies, claiming contract violations and damages of $1 billion. You promised to do this and you didn't do it and you owe us $1 billion. And of course, the Hermitage companies immediately say, of course we will pay, though there's no evidence of any bank transfers. Then they demanded a tax refund of $230 million because they said, well, we had zero profits. We had to pay this out. They were collusive lawsuits. It was all a Browder scam. Now,
and that's the whole, Lucy, real quick, that is the whole crux of the Magnitsky story. I mean, that is the absolute core of the disagreement here. Who discovered it, whether it was Rima Starova, a figure we haven't really talked about yet, or whether it was Sergei Magnitsky, as Browder claims. That is the core of the dispute, isn't it?
Absolutely. But there's another interesting point. A guy named Viktor Markelov, he was the one who has been organizing the paid organizer of this scam. It was discovered, he was tried and jailed for it. He said in his testimony that he worked with a Sergei Leonidovich. He didn't say a last name. Well, Magnitsky is Sergei Leonidovich Magnitsky. And that's one interesting point. The other point is...
Wait, Lucy, we've got to go into a break. We're going to come back on this. This part of it is huge because this would be where Browder is complicit in setting up the very shell companies he said that he was duped by, that he says that his shareholders, but namely that he says, and this is the weird part, he says the Russian government was duped by. He's saying that this sort of team of independent criminals in association with the Russian government ripped the Russian government off, ripped Russian taxpayers off. But if Sergei Magnitsky, Sergei Leonidovich Magnitsky, was there at the signing, if he was involved, that puts the hole in the story. That is the smoking gun. We're going to come back. We're right at the center of that story there. We're speaking with Lucy Commissar. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines.
Tune in every Friday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for a weekly segment of the worst mainstream media headlines of the week. They tell us what's behind the worst, most misleading, and funniest headlines from around the news with Steve Patt of the blog Left Eye on the News. Together, they pull apart the corporate media's bias, spin, and downright lies. Tune in this Friday and every Friday for the worst and most misleading headlines of the week.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Commissar. I am joined by my co-host, Jamarl Thomas. I am Shane Stranahan, and we are joined by our guest, Lucy Commissar, investigative journalist focusing on corporate and financial corruption. By the way, we're talking about Bill Browder and Sergei Magnitsky. If you want to check Lucy out, if you want to check her work out, you can either follow her on Twitter, Lucy Commissar, that's with a K, LucyKomisar, or after you followed her on Twitter, go over to our website, The Commissar Scoop. You can dig into the back catalog there. Again, The Commissar Scoop. That's Commissar with a K. TheCommissarScoop.com. Lucy, thanks again for being with us. We started.
Okay, let's finish what I started
go back into it. Yeah, go for it.
The other smoking gun. The issue is, when did Browder learn about this company's being re-registered? He said it was done and he didn't know, it took him a long time to find out. However, HSBC was the trustee of his fund, of the Hermitage Fund. And in July, they filed financial documents, and this was backed up by their controller, who spoke under oath at federal court, Southern District of New York. They were taking $7 million to put aside that they might have to spend to get back the companies that had been stolen from them. That's July. Browder says he found out about this in October. July, August, September, October. That's 3 months. Browder, what were you doing in those 3 months? That's another indication that he was in on the scam. So
I want to single that out real quick. You're saying that Viktor Markelov, one of the officials whose names was on, one of the people whose names was on these companies, saying that he was in touch with a Sergei Leonidovich. That is the sort of Russianized way of saying Sergei Magnitsky, Sergei Leonidovich Magnitsky. That's smoking gun one. Smoking gun two is months before Browder says he found out that his companies were stolen. You're saying his attorneys were preparing money for that theft, basically, for the theft that, again, he hadn't found out about at that point.
HSBC attorneys.
Thank you, HSBC attorneys. Okay, please carry on. I just wanted to sort of highlight those two.
Okay. So I talked about this letter that had gone, that Cardin had sent to Hillary Clinton, that 60 people be put on a visa ban list. Well, Hillary didn't buy it. So then the same House staffer, Parker, arranged for Browder to testify in May at the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. That's not an official House body, it's a pressure group. And the commission chair was Massachusetts Democratic Congressman Jim McGovern. He runs as a liberal, but he's a Russophobe. Browder repeated his story, the whole Sergei uncovered the crime, he's tortured in prison. Browder had the Physicians for Human Rights of Cambridge, Mass., that's the state where McGovern lives, do a report. There's nothing about torture. He gave them all the documents he had there, so that's another made-up story. And McGovern is letting him go on with this fake stuff. Now, so he and meanwhile, again, let's go back to, this is May of 2010. In December, Browder is telling the San Diego Law School, this is on video, they put him in a straitjacket, put him in an isolation room, waited outside until he died. Nothing about violence. Okay, so then in July of last year, 2019, I saw McGovern when he spoke at the Council on Foreign Relations. I asked if he would send me evidence backing up the claim that Magnitsky was tortured and killed. He agreed, and he introduced me to an aide who put me in touch with the person who could help. That was Kimberly Stanton, director of the Lantos Commission. She absolutely refused, in the email I have, to provide any information. Then I wrote to McGovern's press secretary, to his legislative director. They ignored repeated requests, never sent me anything. I conclude that McGovern, who pretends to be a liberal civil rights promoter, is a fake and a fraud. McGovern introduced the Magnitsky bill in the House. Now, Ben Cardin agreed to be, Senator Ben Cardin, Maryland agreed to be co-sponsor of a Magnitsky Act in the Senate. He looked for a Republican co-sponsor. That was John McCain, a Russophobic senator who never met a law he didn't like. And they so then in September, Cardin, McCain, Roger Wicker, Republican of Mississippi, Joe Lieberman, Democrat of Connecticut, introduced a bill in the Senate. Then we have now, but this is really how the law got passed. Lots of things get introduced. The Jackson-Vanik Amendment was put in place in the mid-70s. It imposed trade sanctions on the Soviet Union to punish it for not allowing Soviet Jews to emigrate. So eventually 1.5 million Jews were allowed to leave the country. 37 years later, the Soviet Union doesn't exist. Everybody can immigrate, and Jackson-Vanik is still on the books. It blocks American corporations from enjoying the same trade benefits in Russia as the world's other WTO members. So the business community in the U.S. didn't like it. Jackson-Vanik has to go. The Obama administration agrees. John Kerry, chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, agrees. But Kerry, however, opposed the Magnitsky Act. He thought it was untoward interference in Russia, and he was delaying bringing it to a vote in committee. So Browder got Lieberman to agree to block the Jackson-Vanik repeal until the administration stopped blocking Magnitsky. And they did that, and Kerry, in the end, had to stop his opposition to the Magnitsky Act. So he called for a meeting of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in June 2012. So we've gotten to 2012 by now. And at the hearing, interesting, he said, people should be very mindful of the need for the United States not to always be pointing fingers and lecturing, and to be somewhat introspective as we think about other things. He said he was, quote, worried about the unintended consequences of requiring that kind of detailed reporting about these people who are going to be targeted that implicates a broader range of intelligence. He didn't have to worry. Reporting, intelligence, actual evidence would never be required. The U.S. was setting up a kangaroo court and calling it a human rights tribunal. Real evidence, intelligence is certainly not necessary in a kangaroo court. So the bill passed the House in November, 365 to 43, voting no with 37 Democrats and 6 Republicans. Among the noes were Maxine Waters and Ron Paul, and surprising to me, New York Democrat Gerald Nadler, who since then has become a Russophobe. Tulsi Gabbard had not yet been elected to the House. Now going to the Senate, Kyle Parker told Browder, there are some senators who are insisting on making this a global instead of a Russia-focused act. That included Cardin, but also Carl Levin, the Democrat of Michigan. He's no longer in the Senate, a political giant. He spent many years holding hearings about offshore tax evasion. He must have known very well how Browder was a poster child for offshore tax evading crooks. And Browder, of course, wanted a Russia-only bill because the purpose of the law was to attack Russia, not to promote global human rights or any human rights. So Cardin dropped that demand, so it's back to Russia only. So the final count in December 2012 was 92 to 4. Levin, and 3 other Democrats, Bernie Sanders and Jack Reed and Sheldon Whitehouse, both of Rhode Island, were the only senators to vote no. Elizabeth Warren was not yet in the Senate. And this was signed by Obama a week later, December 2012. The importance, as you indicated in your introduction, this was the first pillar of Russiagate, where the Cold Warrior Democrats joined with the Cold Warrior Republicans to build a wall against Russia. And the specific wall in this case was getting Interpol to refuse to issue a red notice that would require other countries to arrest him based on the grounds that he was a tax evader. And he would name his book Red Notice as a jab at the Russians. And so then we got other parts, other pillars of Russiagate. But this was the very first. It's built on a very easily provable lies, but both officials in the government, people like McGovern, they don't answer. Cardin, they don't answer if you ask them for evidence. This is based on a tissue of lies, and is also unfortunately supported by the media, which follows the line of the deep state, the intelligence community, the State Department, so that you will not find in the major media anything truthful about the Browder Magnitsky hoax.
No, for the longest time, some of the key facts were buried. I mean, up until fairly recently, within the past year, I would say, even just on Wikipedia, which again, not the most reliable source in the world, but even on Wikipedia, Magnitsky was listed as a lawyer. Within the past year or so, he's been changed to a tax advisor. So a simple sort of fact like that, that's nevertheless pivotal to the story, easy to research, easy factually to figure out for yourself, has just been misreported time and again by the media. Of course, that's how this stuff works. That's how this all gets covered over. A couple of quick notes here. You just given a great, excellent layout of a different aspect, one aspect of the history here that we haven't really talked about, which is from the U.S. political perspective, how the machine got this passed, who some of the key players were there. I want to go back to a few things though. You were talking earlier on about Kyle Parker and Jonathan Weiner. You brought up APCO. Jonathan Weiner was with APCO at this point. One of their main clients at the time was Khodorkovsky. What year, when you're putting him, what year was that interaction actually? Could we go back to that, Lucy?
We're talking about 2010, when in March this was a letter that Kyle Parker. So a lot of this stuff I'm taking actually from Red Notice. A lot of the stuff in Red Notice is lies, but some of the things and some of this part I think is truthful because he has no reason to lie on this. But he wrote the letter to Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State, in March of 2010. And so we're talking at that time. It starts really just about 4 months after Magnitsky dies, but it goes on until 2012. It's not going anywhere until they see the Jackson-Vanik connection, and okay. That's how it passed.
All right, we only have a few minutes left, and I want to highlight a few more things to get people sort of interested in this. It relates to Biden too. I'm going to come back to that. You mentioned lies. One big lie in Red Notice, and this is just glaring, and you were talking about it earlier. It came up. We didn't really talk about it, but it's that Browder says in Red Notice that he got a call from Sergei Magnitsky while Magnitsky was reportedly being beaten. So there's this voicemail that was left on Browder's phone. So he says of Magnitsky somehow getting a phone while he's in prison and recording himself being beaten and calling for help and stuff. And that was apparently, that's what he says was his last message. No, I don't understand why he would, I don't mean to laugh because that's a serious accusation. I don't understand why he wouldn't have told anybody about that. That's a huge accusation, but it took him years and a book apparently to get that out. I mean, real quick, we only have a minute. And I don't want to get sidelined just sort of criticizing him or making fun of him or something.
That's dark.
But that's just glaring.
That's dark.
It is. No, but with
one of my theories is there's some cartoonist that puts little clues, does cartoons and puts little clues around that you're supposed to find. I think that one of my theories is Browder has deliberately put in some obviously absurd thing in the book just to show how stupid his readers are, because he says that this beating, first of all, Americans can't have cell phones in prison. I don't know if maybe Denmark can, but I mean, he's got a cell phone in prison, really? And supposedly he was in various versions, he was tied or chained to a bed or a post, and they're beating him up. How's he getting his cell phone out and dialing it?
It doesn't make any sense. No, I know.
But also, this was he's supposedly got the message. Browder got the message coming home late, and was after midnight. That would have been about 3 in the morning at that time, Russia time. Well, that would have been 3 in the morning the day he died, because then he says he goes back to sleep, and it's not till the next morning he realizes he's never going to be able to speak to Magnitsky again. Well, all of the reports, including the report, the forensic reports, the death certificate, say that Magnitsky died 9:30 p.m.
That's right.
Night.
It would have been the wrong time. Lucy, we've got to go. We've got 20 seconds, but no, that's absolutely right. It would have been absolutely the wrong time. Thank you for joining us. That's Lucy Commissar, investigative journalist focusing on corporate and financial corruption. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stremny.
Guys, I want to thank all of you for joining us for the show. It was a very good show for today. I have to admit, the beating thing is wild to me because that's so dark. I mean, there's a lot of mechanics that had to take place. Somebody had to get the phone, somebody had to tie him up, somebody had to put him on the bed, somebody had to do all of these things, and somebody had to intentionally dial a number. And it's like, this is me dying, bro! And that's, and then for the secondary part, after receiving a call of a man being beat to death, where you somehow know that he's tied to a post and people are beating him, that you receive that and go back to bed. It's just wild. It's just wild. All right. I'm going to leave this here. Guys, I want to thank you for joining us. We had an amazing show tonight. Today. My wife is going to have to be cutting a lot of these videos for today. But like, share, subscribe. Let me sure there were no chats. I think I did Wesley Walker's Trudy. Please read The Correspondent, The Neoliberal Era Ending, based on the Financial Times article, Get Some Optimism. Trudy, I'm going to write that down, and I'm going to read that, because, it would help brighten my day, I suppose. The Neoliberal Era is ending. I would just say this. Sometimes the light at the end of the tunnel really is a moving bus. And every once in a while, you look up, you get through. FDR was an anomaly, yet he put his stamp on the world for the last 40 years. Pop reality, it is definitely that time if they're not Democrats anymore. Judas Priest, November entry number 1, leftover. Oh, we said that one. Look, you have a lot of symbolic gestures that people are making, but at the end of the day, most of these people will turn and pull that lever for whatever random Democrat they put up, entirely because they're not Trump. The argument, honestly, that should be made is, how do you justify, real terms, how do you justify not supporting a litany of policies that the entire party predominantly supports? But instead, you're willing to basically throw the dice and potentially lose to a man who you're calling apocalypse, just so you don't appropriate those policies that the majority of the people support. How do you justify that? Because ultimately what's happening here is, we're not losing it. You are. You're the one that's running in the race. It is your responsibility to get those votes. It is not my responsibility to give you anything. It is not even my responsibility, at least the way we do our politics, to even care that you have a political election that's going on, especially if there are fires that are going on around me in my society, either from the standpoint of me getting rent, or me having enough money to buy food, or for me feeling degraded being in this goddamn food line, whatever that is. I'm making the point that it is your job to get these people into a frame and a sense of mind that alleviates their concerns, or at the very least attempts to do the big things that are required and necessary in order to deal with the problems that was there when you were there in office all of those years, creating all of the problems that we are bitching and complaining about now. There is no political solution to our problem right now. The solution is literally outside the political space and fighting on behalf of policy unattached to party. You may have somebody that would say, I'm a Republican, but look, I do believe people should have health care. And they may stand beside you, not if you're a Democrat. Yes, if it's functional from the standpoint of policy. That is your way out. That is your move. That is our space. And we would have been far better off if Sanders and these progressive groups that say, we have these demands. And when Joe Biden says, well, go vote for the other guy, it's, oh, okay, wait, okay, fair enough. That is your path. That is your only path. You can wait for 1,000 years, and maybe you'll get another FDR at some point, or you could take an active step to try to mitigate the political situation which we have. And to, unfortunately press on. But whether it's Trump or whether it's Joe Biden, you don't give that vote away. You hold that vote and you say, this is what I want. You either accept it or don't. I have 88% of the public agreeing with me. If you want to take the chance to lose to Trump, a man who you're calling the apocalypse, as opposed to organically pulling together the party, getting these people energetic, running out there and saying, go vote for Joe Biden because he's going to do this, he's going to do that, even if you're just lying, which you most likely would be. It is a pathway to win. Instead, you are dragging your nutsack over the face of lefties just to get across how irrelevant they are, with the notion that you're going to vote for me anyway. So I'm going to go try to get some of these Republicans. It's degrading and debasing the political space in regards to the people who you need to vote for you, getting it across to them that basically you don't need them, or that they are so terrified of what is taking place that it doesn't matter what you do to them. They're going to vote for you anyway. And I think that for a society is one of the saddest places to be in. That's not you dealing with your party at that point. That is your party basically standing there saying, you will embrace my apathy because they're going to be nanometer worse. You better love me and my apathy. And that's basically our political system, which means that even in a time of crisis, the things that you want, the things that you need, the things that your society is obviously desperate for are off the table. Democrats and Republicans, even in an election year, even when their job is to get your vote, they assume, perhaps rightly, that the Democrats and the lefties are so beaten down, that the blacks, all of these people are so terrified by the monster that we've created that's Trump, that I don't have to do anything. I could be in my basement. I can eat my Cheetos. I can have my mental gaffes. Doesn't matter. You still get the guy and vote for him. Doesn't matter that all of you guys agreed that Medicare for all, Green New Deal, expansion of student debt, elimination of student debt, expansion of Social Security, $15 minimum wage, if not higher. Those things, dramatically popular, not just by Democrats, by the entire population. Poll after poll after poll, as they were running, those ideas were popular. And guess what? The saddest part is with everything that you know now, if the person that won it was Sanders, what would this look like from the standpoint of how he would run this race and this kind of affirmative, these are the things that we're going to do, and having all of this fire and pressure of the society itself behind him to say, our world is on fire, and I'm the guy that's going to put it back on his axis. And how is any political actor going to stand in the face of him doing that when he is a literal crisis around him for him to do so? I'll read your book, Trudy. Maybe there's some hope in there somewhere. Like, share, and subscribe.